go ahead and get started with our Planning Commission tonight. Appreciate the attendance and some of the topics we'll be going over. We'll start off the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Commissioner Mitchell if you'd lead us in that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is actually the minutes. We didn't get the minutes in time to review those, so we will table that for the next meeting. Kim?
Pardon?
We'll table the minutes for the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay. First item on the agenda is preliminary plat. Is that it? Brandon?
It is a preliminary plat for the RB subdivision.
Okay.
A couple months back, we had the Hall Industrial subdivision come before you. This is a request that would take one of the lots. If we can skip to like the third page.
Okay.
One more page. So here's the plat here on the bottom of the screen. So the area that we're looking at, well, it's kind of faded, but it's taking an existing lot in the Hall Industrial subdivision, most likely lot 2. We've got 1, 3, and 4 on the sides, and it's dividing it in the manner that you see here. Access is being provided via these easements as well as utilities, which will be run to this rear portion. And then the applicant for the RB subdivision would be coming in shortly hereafter with a site plan for this southern lot. So the main thing you're looking tonight is just the preliminary plat request to further subdivide the lot within the Hall Industrial subdivision. And the staff recommendation is listed there in the report with the finding and condition that it meet the city's zoning requirements and construction standards.
Okay.
Questions on this item for staff?
This is down there by west of PDM Steel.
Yes.
It looks like, I drove by down there, it looks like they've got the roads all widened.
Yes,
With curb and
so
curb.
the improvements that you see going in now were reviewed and approved with the Hall Industrial subdivision. We have that underway.
Okay. Any questions from the commissioners on this? Okay. Well, could entertain a motion on this?
Preliminary plats, do we approve those, or do we recommend those?
You are on this one because it's not master plan development.
Make a motion then that we approve the RB subdivision preliminary plat along with the findings and conditions.
Got a motion, you'll hear a second.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Next item is an annexation. Looks like Dave's going to review this with us.
Thank you. I'll try to not make this any more complicated than it needs to be. The subject property is in the Leland area. Everybody know where the Revere Health Building is, which is actually in Salem, but it's just on the other side of what will be the Salem Spanish Fork city boundary. The subject properties, right, as Mr. Clark's pointing out, just to the north of this is Revere Health. So this is 8,000 south, heading out towards I-15, we'll change there. 26 and a half or so acres right here. You can see the current city boundary right here with that red dashed line, so the property is contiguous with the city boundary. Otherwise, the proposed annexation meets all of the requirements that need to be satisfied in order for the city to be able to annex the subject property. Included in the materials that you have is a feasibility study that's probably one of the lighter, more simple documents that we've prepared and received relative to an annexation. I think it's largely because we really don't believe there is much issue to be considered with annexing the property at this time. I'm a little bit hesitant, typically to be a big cheerleader for something like this, but in this case, I think it makes great sense for the city to look favorably upon any annexation proposals for properties heading out towards Interstate 15. Things have gone back and forth in recent years, kind of wildly, relative to plans to construct some infrastructure in the area that would make properties developable. Right now, the key pieces of infrastructure that are needed for that to happen do not exist. That being said, I think there's a fairly high likelihood that 2020 will finally be the year that would have a wastewater lift station constructed on this property right here, which the city acquired last year for the purpose of building that lift station on it. So,
Dave,
yeah.
there was some talk once about right there being that lift station. Has that got moved? Then it
It's
sounds
just
like.
simply been relocated.
Yeah. And then that red line, everything east of that represents what's currently annexed into the city?
Exactly. So
Okay.
everything to the east and down here to the north is in Spanish Fork today.
Does that line continue north and there's no more jogs? Just keeps going straight up?
You
Yeah.
can take a better look at it, but I think it,
Oh, there is some jogs to the west.
you can remember, I think it was in 2019 that we annexed some more property over here. So we've had a few annexations that have kind of incrementally
Yeah.
moved that boundary further to the west
Yep.
and to the south.
These guys are they aware of the annex proposal? Are they interested in annexing as well at the same time? Any word there?
With them specifically, no. But one hope that we've had, we talked about this quite a bit last summer and into the fall, up until and even after Mr. Cloward made application to have this property annexed at this time, to try to put together an annexation that potentially would have simply taken the city boundary all the way out to the interstate. I know the city manager and some council members have met with some property owners out there even within the last month to talk more about that. I don't know what, might happen from a timing perspective, but it does seem like there's some desire on the part of at least some of those property owners to be annexed into the city. I think at this point in time, we didn't necessarily want to hold Mr. Cloward up anymore to try to put a bigger project together, but ideally that would have happened if we could have. In talking about the lift station and it being constructed, where I mentioned a second ago, that has been designed, as I understand it, to be able to serve all of the properties out to the interstate. And with the investment that the city and others would make in that infrastructure, then I think it almost becomes the responsible thing to do in terms of trying to get as much of that land annexed, within a reasonable time frame, because of that investment
Yeah.
and the value probably that the city would enjoy in having development happen sooner than later.
So if that is annexed and they try and develop, where are the utilities, water right now that they would have to tie into? Is they north in the part that's
They
not
would all be
annexed?
brought down to the lift station. That's in the design of the project, so this little, as soon as it loads here. Anyway, the lift station right here is where all the utilities will be brought to today from their existing location from these developments up here. Sewer is at this location, water's around the same location. They'll be brought down to the lift station right here. So they'll be within proximity. If they did develop, they would just bring it, that little chunk to get to their property, and then they'd be able to use it.
Was there not a comment in the material about maybe tying into Salem's water?
At one point in time, we were doing that. At this point in time, that's not realistic, at least not on any kind of a large scale.
The Mulesty Meadows old mill, they discharge there now. The idea is we would be all off of Salem's. Yep.
Are there any homes in that area now that would be included in this annexation, or any electrical hookups that are there?
No homes. But to talk about power for a second, and I don't want to keep you guys here all night once again, but right now the area is being served by, call it SESD, Strawberry Electric Service District. And we are obligated as a city to buy whatever facilities they have when properties are annexed into the community. So facilities, that's power lines, that's power poles, that's transformers. And what we are exploring right now is the prospect of being pretty proactive, potentially at least, to go ahead and move to do maybe one mass buyout as the city, with the idea that as people annex, they wouldn't necessarily reimburse the city for that buyout, which historically we've looked to developers or people that petition the city to annex to make that payment to SESD when the annexation happens. For a variety of reasons, we think that there's a better approach, and it probably involves the city fronting the funds to make SESD whole, and we simply would collect as the use of properties change. So when properties develop, that's when, akin to a pioneering agreement or connectors agreement, that type of a thing, they would make, again, the city whole. We've talked about doing that a lot of different ways. It might end up being on a per acre basis or something like that. We're talking about that weekly now, so I expect that we'll have something resolved here probably within the next few weeks on that.
The city's electrical facilities don't extend that far now, but we'll need to for the sewer pumping station there, right?
And that's kind of the beauty of a lift station. It has to have power, it has to have water, and it's sewer. So that leaves pressurized irrigation, but everything else is then in the vicinity. Of course, in using this property as the example, there still would be some distance that the developer would have to go to tie into that.
How close is the power here to where the, this is the area of the, let's see, no. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's, but this is where the lift station's going to be, right? Is right in there? How close are our electrical lines to that at this time? Are they clear back at Old Mill Road?
I don't think we're close to that.
They're back in that location. Our map's not working that has electrical on it at the
Maybe
moment.
at least that far though.
So there is a little construction there that'll take place by the time.
Yeah, I think constructing a lift station, it's a $2 million project or so. Might even be higher than that at this point. But it's a large project, and for whatever this is worth, and the things could change, and they may have changed already, but the idea has been that the city essentially would contribute a third of that cost, with the expectation that a couple of developers working on large projects in the area would contribute another third, and the city would be reimbursed for its part of that contribution as the rest of the area develops. But we would be fronting some of that.
And this annexed property is expected to be zoned RR?
At the time of annexation, yes. We would anticipate that the property would be rezoned before it develops, whenever the timing's right for that. So.
And are we able to approve this, or will we making a recommendation?
You'll be making a recommendation. So we'd ask for you to make a recommendation both on the question as to whether the property should be annexed or not.
Okay.
And the zoning. In this case, the Zone Review Committee has recommended that the annexation be approved and that rural residential zone be assigned at the time of annexation.
Okay, this is not a public,
Not a public hearing.
Yep, okay. All right. Got a lot of questions answered there. Is there anything else, Commissioners? Okay. So it looks like we're looking for a recommendation on this.
I would make a proposal that we recommend to the City Council that the Swenson annexation and zoning proposal be approved along with the are there any other things that the city has requested on that? Or is just, there's
Just
just
findings, no
Findings.
conditions.
Specify the zoning.
That's really it.
Yep. So I would recommend, or I would make the motion that we recommend to the city council that the Swenson proposal be approved and sent to the city council.
Okay, got a motion? You got a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. The next item is public hearing, correct? Title 15 amendment?
We have two proposals for Title 15. To
Okay.
address the first one, we're going to look at a minor change to our development enhancement overlay zone. This here shows, highlighted, it's just the only proposed additional text is here in red. And so there'd be no change to the intent or the purpose of the overlay zone, or the process, the analysis that the council would go through as far as when to apply it. What we are adding is, or proposing to add, is just in addition to the zones that it's already an option in, we would add the residential office zone. And just for quick additional information, the purpose of the RO residential office district is to allow for low-intensity professional office uses on a scale consistent with residential areas. So generally, you may have an area that has residential on one side and maybe commercial uses on another. The residential office is generally used as an appropriate transition between the two. And so in looking at the development enhancement overlay zone, which when you read the purpose and intent statement here, if you've got a property that's difficult to develop under the standard regulations, it does give an applicant some opportunity where they can request something less strict than the standards of the development code. But there obviously is an analysis that has to take place in showing what they're proposing doesn't create any impacts that otherwise would be addressed or mitigated with the standard development practices. And so
Okay.
the one change we're requesting is just this additional text here, which would include the RO zone as a potential property that this could be utilized.
Okay. So that's the first part of this, Title 15?
Yeah, and we request that there be separate motions on the two Title 15 changes.
Okay. Any questions on this suggestion here? If not, we're going to go ahead and go into public hearing. If anyone's got anything to comment. Seeing none, we'll go out of public hearing. And again, if there's any questions about this, commissioners? Okay, I'd entertain a motion on Title 15A.
Is this a recommendation or approval? Okay. So I'd recommend that we adopt the changes to the Title 15 as outlaid. We recommend this to the City Council.
Okay, you got a motion, got a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Brandon or Dave, let's go with the second part of that.
I'll start. Presentation for you as well. You recall, at least most of you, that we've been talking with the CLYDE companies or Sunrock about the potential relocation of the facility they have on Arrowhead Trail to a site that CLYDE company owns on the north end of town, north of the airport. That's been going on for years now. And we had a visit to their facility last summer. that I think was particularly helpful since that time. It was particularly helpful in terms of helping everybody, I think, understand, what maybe some of the impacts of some of their operations are there, and things that they can do to help mitigate those impacts. Since that time, Mr. Morgan, representing Sunrock and one of their subsidiary companies, has had additional conversations with you as the commission, and we've had several other meetings of staff with their staff to talk about different things that could be done, different practices and tools that could be employed, so that really their facility, doing at least some of the same things that they do on the south end of town, could be relocated to where that property could be improved and to where the operation could commence and function without giving that part of the community any kind of black eye, without being any kind of a detriment to, for example, the city's efforts and our interest in attracting other business to that part of the community, which incidentally I think they share that interest and that goal to try to help facilitate additional economic development, the creation of additional jobs and additional capital investment, that type of a thing in the area that immediately surrounds the facility or the site that we'll talk about here in a minute on the north end of town. So tonight I am going to discuss what staff is proposing the city council ultimately consider, and with your recommendation, as the approach to change our zoning code to make it possible at least for them to ask for site plan approval to be able to move that facility. The approach that we're recommending you consider is a zoning mechanism. So just maybe to take a minute to talk about why we think that's a favorable approach from the city's perspective. Zoning is law. So when we talk about the city's zoning map and our zoning text, the ordinance, in order for those things to change, it requires a legislative act. So that's why when those proposals are made, you are acting as an advisory board to the land use authority, which is the legislative body of the city council. When it comes to legislative acts, those legislative bodies are given pretty broad deference to do whatever they want. They're typically not obligated to approve changes to law and that type of a thing. So from the perspective of wanting to be as conservative as we can be and to give ultimately the city council as much discretion as they could have in saying yes or no to a particular proposal, we think this approach with the zoning overlay is the best route to go. Now, that being said, I maybe made it sound more onerous than it would be. You see zone changes regularly. City council sees zone changes regularly, and typically they get approved without a lot of discussion, and they're pretty uneventful. But still, that discretion exists, and if there ever was a concern that somebody had with a particular site maybe, or a particular proposal, the city council, again, they'd have the ability to say yes or no without fear of I would say maybe a little differently, without any extensive or significant fear of litigation or that type of a thing. The city would not be placed in any likely jeopardy with their decision. So there's that part of why we think this is a good approach in this case, where let me make this clear as well. We are talking about uses, and maybe I'm jumping over some of the more important parts, but oftentimes facilities that process aggregate, that recycle materials for the purpose of reusing, maybe that base aggregate element of whether it be concrete or asphalt, whatever it is, they are impactful on surroundings, or they certainly can be. So that's why we think it makes some sense to consider what else we can use, and probably in addition to that, how we could use suspenders to really make sure that we're we're providing as much protection as possible. And also relative to this being a legislative act, there would be an individual ordinance crafted, which is really what the city council approves to change law, and specific requirements for an operation, specific conditions and that type of a thing could be built into that document that, among other things, could limit how a facility operates in different respects. Some things we've talked about relative to the site, we'll see some imagery from the latest plans that we've talked with the applicants about, limiting how tall storage piles can be and different things like that, things that might not only impact the likelihood that there's going to be noise, dust, any of those types of impacts, but also things that would be more visually impactful on an area, and a number of other things that I think likely we would talk with you about if an actual proposal to employ this makes its way to one of your agendas.
So that had been our concern when we've listened to them, I think twice previously, was give us an idea of what noise and dust is going to be generated. Give us something to go look at to get an idea. They've not been, I mean, are they gearing up to come back again? And if they are, do we have a field trip to take to go look at something, or?
That's a great question. I almost kind of feel like there are two parts to that. So relative to them coming back again, should the city council adopt this change to our zoning code, then that would simply give them an opportunity to apply. So they absolutely would be back before you again.
What is stopping that from happening right now? Because it's already an approved use in that zone. Is that correct?
It's a crusher, so it's not an allowed use because of that particular part of their operation. We've argued that
Okay.
the crushing that they've done on their Arrowhead Trail site is basically vested. That's a grandfather
Okay.
part of what they've been doing.
What's their property zoned right now?
It's zoned industrial 1, so the way that this potentially would work, and incidentally, there are other ways that this could be approached, and if anybody feels that there's a better way, we're certainly happy to talk about that, but the underlying, that's the phrase we would use, zoning would not change, so it at least potentially would stay industrial 1. But with an overlay, that's basically a supplemental zone that is also assigned to the property that can afford property owners some additional rights from a zoning perspective.
How often do we use overlay zones? Can you give us some other examples where it's been used in the city?
We'll talk about the development enhancement overlay here in a minute that was really crafted to make griffles happen on the site that it's at. We also used it to allow Vasa to be relocated to the old grocery building there. Probably the first time that we've used it, I think sort of in contemporary times, since the turn of the century, was with the infill overlay, where that does the same thing. The properties that are zoned R16 or R3, additional opportunities can be given to property owners to do things that are above and beyond what those two underlying zones would allow if certain conditions are met, and ultimately if the Planning Commission and City Council think it's a good thing for the community. So overlay zones.
But if we establish that this is in this overlay zone, and you said we've given them the right to have that, are we limiting our ability to control what they put on there as it impacts those around them?
So I might have misunderstood you, but right now we haven't.
No, if we adopted this.
If we adopted,
Yes.
okay. So if we, I'll say it a little bit, if the city council adopts this, then that simply, this would not at that point in time be applied to any properties in the city with their adoption of this. It would only be applied to specific sites as people make application, to have it employed on those sites, and as those applications are approved. So
Are
that would
those,
be part of that next step.
are overlay zone approvals public hearings?
It's just like any other zone change, so yes. Yep. The same notice requirements come into play, and and everything like that, yeah.
Did overlays kind of come in as so many years ago, you could do a variance on a piece of property that was unique just to that property, and you'd approach the city council or whatever, and it was just for that property. Is these overlays something that's allowed you to come in and say, hey, that could happen in various places in the city, so we have this overlay that allows for that similar situation to take place? Is that kind of what overlays are adopted for?
That is a fair comparison,
Okay.
yet they are distinct.
Because they kind of did away with variances because of the individual discretion on each one.
Right. You sat on the city's Board of Adjustment.
Yes.
When you were on the Board of Adjustment, how often did the Board of Adjustment meet? Do you remember?
It was at least quarterly.
Okay.
It might have been monthly. And we had a lot of variances come through, specifically in the older parts of town where the narrow properties needed a carport or a garage put on right on the borderline.
Exactly. Where somebody couldn't meet the actual standard of the zoning code, but potentially the Board of Adjustment could grant relief from that standard
Yeah.
by granting a variance. And to make a long story short, I know Mr. Snyder has experience with this as well, but it was in the late 90s and early 2000s where I think communities' concerns about variances, and it was really more about how cities were using that as a tool, kind of hit a crescendo. Even state law was cleaned up and tightened up a little bit relative to criteria that have to be met in order for somebody to qualify for a variance. And that window now that somebody has to be able to fit through to qualify for a variance is really, really small. So in the time that I've been here, I think we've only issued one variance, or might have been two, not more than that. So our Board of Adjustment went from meeting several times a year to where the land use authority that now, it's actually our appeal authority, we call it. It's the new Board of Adjustment. They've met no more than 3 times in the last 14 years.
Oh, wow.
Which is partly why we went the route that we did with the development enhancement overlay. It was to be able to provide, under certain circumstances, some particular zoning opportunities that people otherwise wouldn't enjoy.
Yeah. So an overlay then allows for quite a few opportunities for similar businesses, property owners to do a similar thing. Is this aggregate thing, you see it being used that much to create an overlay just for it?
Again, belt and suspenders. What we're trying to do, this end in particular, I feel really comfortable that we're on the right track. Maybe use kind of that same analogy. We've tried to create an opportunity that is so small for somebody to apply to be able to use this overlay that it wouldn't be
Okay.
replicated with any, real significant impact on the community beyond
Okay.
this site and maybe a few others. So in addition to some site-specific criteria that need to be met, for example, property size, minimum of 40 acres, there's some geographical limitations that are really significant. Sites, in order to qualify, would have to be at least 1,000 feet from Main Street, 2,500 feet from I-15, be zoned one of our industrial zones, and so forth. So at least now, the perspective that we've taken is that we'd like a facility in the community potentially, and maybe if somebody can make a good pitch in the future as to why another one should be located someplace else, that could be considered at that point in time. But we're not necessarily feeling like Spanish Fork needs to be home to several operations of this nature.
So are we going to be recommending just this overlay, or are we going to actually be looking at those details and approving those details?
So for tonight, it's only action on the proposed zoning text. That's it.
Okay.
Now, that being said, kind of anticipated that you would maybe have some questions about some of the details. I really appreciate that Mr. Henry and Mr. Bernard, representing different CLYDE companies, can I just say, maybe I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. They're here to answer any questions. And I'm really poor with introductions, but particularly Mr. Bernard. He, as I understand it, he has the pleasure of trying to do everything that can be done to help CLYDE companies limit nuisance dust on many of their operations, if not all that they have. So we certainly, as staff, have appreciated his insight and him sharing his experience with us. That's helped us feel more comfortable with this operation, the move that we're talking about. I think he's here tonight to answer any questions that you guys might have about specific things that they do along those lines. Also, he's at least an expert, if not their expert, on the permitting and different things that they go through, and just the regulatory nature of the state division of air quality, I think it is, and any other entities that have the responsibility to regulate operations like this, and again, nuisance dust or whatever that might be. One of the last conversations that we had with you about this idea left us collectively, us as your staff, and the applicants with the assignment to try to find a good example to go look at. And that sounded particularly attractive to me because I think that the previous year with the transfer station, talking about that being moved, we had really significant concerns about what that would mean for this particular part of the community. And as a handful of representatives, city council, planning commission, city staff, would look at some well-run facilities, we were largely able, I think, to feel differently about that. So in hopes that maybe that was a model that we could follow with this use, we've looked into the idea of trying to find that model that, again, we could simply pattern things after here. And Mr. Henry probably will want to comment on this as well, because actually I'm interested in this. So what we'd be talking about here is a facility that operate differently from anything that's out there in the world today. To be candid, I think it would have to operate differently than anything that we've seen to date. So that's part of the conversation, I think, as well.
Are you going to go into detail on what the overlay consists of? I guess my question is, you've been in all our meetings, you know our concerns with Sunrock, the dust and the other things we've brought up. How does this overlay specifically become a win-win for both us and for them?
Maybe to answer that really generally, it's a win for the applicants because they're given an opportunity to propose down to maybe where a particular part of their operation is located on their site. So they're able to make a proposal as to how the facility would be constructed and how it would operate in a very detailed way to paint a very clear picture for you and the city council as to how it would operate, and give us collectively an opportunity to try to gauge what impact that's going to then have on the surrounding area. So that's the opportunity that it creates for them, is that chance to ask for the approval. They're not entitled to any approval, even with the adoption of this. Again, that's part of that legislative aspect of how this is set up. The win for the city, I think, at least as I see it, comes in two different ways. One of the wins is to be able to allow this facility someplace if you want to. The city council wants to. Right now, whether you want to or not, the law doesn't permit it. So just like they don't have an opportunity to apply, you don't have an opportunity to consider it. Also, it gives between you and the city council an opportunity to evaluate those details and to be as critical as you think is prudent and necessary, and at least otherwise as you want to be, to try to address whatever concerns you might have, with the idea that the onus really still is on the applicant to make you and the city council feel comfortable. Now, that all being said, I think there are some other things about this particular proposal that really are worth considering. I don't think long-term Pyramid Tribal Site is in any way, shape, or form the best location for this facility to be be at in Spanish Fork. So I think there's some incentive for the city to talk about having it relocated, period. And so just to get to that point of having that discussion, I think is valuable. And given some changes that are happening in the immediate area around the property that CLYDE company owns, that this would be located on, the timing's really good. There is other infrastructure that's going to be constructed in the area in the relatively near future. This could be part of particular kind of growth in that part of the community that could help instigate or be the impetus for other change as well, by way of attracting additional, like I said earlier, capital investment, creating more jobs and different things like that. That won't happen until we can do some things that are similar to what we just talked about in the Leland area. Get a big lift station built, get therefore water and power available to places that just don't have access to those utilities today and that type of thing. So I could look at it kind of holistically from maybe what is good about it from the city's perspective, but also in terms of just this arrangement and how it can work and how that property and Arrowhead Trail could be repurposed for something that I think could be really a monumental change for that area, and hopefully, speculate here a little bit, maybe dream, but Fritzy property next door, also great untapped development potential and other things in the area that I think probably will continue to go untapped as long as this facility exists where it is and it operates the way that it is.
So in our meetings, our concern, sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, my concern would be, why do we want to take a problem that exists there? Absolutely, positively, it is there. You can hear it, you can see it, you can smell it. It's been documented. And why do we want to take that and put it in another place that development is taking place at this time? There's a couple of buildings that are being built on North Main Street as we speak, since this was proposed some time ago.
And I assume when
There's nothing out there that is proposed at that. Yeah, I agree.
Change goes in, you're gonna get even more.
But my concern is that it is the same old story. We're taking something that has been questionable, we're concerned about, we don't have any answers yet, and we're making this easier. That's not the right term. We are looking at a way for this to happen, and we're not even sure what this place is yet. And I have concern about that. There are a couple of other industrial places in Spanish Fork that this could happen.
Might be a better fit, you're thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in my mind, I go up and down the I-15 corridor, and the only places that these things are happening are places that have been there, just like the site that we have on Arrowhead. We don't see any new ones. The new facilities are out in San Quentin. They're down in Mona. But we're being told now that this is a good deal to move down into the middle of a very vibrant part of our community that's got a lot of potential. And I don't know that I'm so opposed to this as much as I still have no more information than I had last summer.
It feels like this is specifically for the purpose of moving Sunrock to that location.
That's
At least
right.
it feels like.
Paving the way for that.
Yeah.
And the question I have, the biggest concern that's always come up in all of our meetings about this is the dust. And in the last one we had, basically I think it was decided that unless if there's a way for them to build a covered structure over that we don't,
Containment.
to contain it, that we don't like it. So my question then is, how does this new overlay specifically address the concern of the dust?
If I may, it does specifically address that from what I read. That this proposal does not let them off the hook for that. the city council would still have the ability to say yea or nay or impose additional restrictions that could take care of that. It appears to me that the city's being asked to make multiple steps without hearing what the steps are from the applicant now. And I hesitate to make, you know, those steps and kind of, where are these steps leading? Are they going up or down? I don't know. And so that's my concern with the wording that we have now. The wording that, as I see it now, allows those things with conditions, but it allows them. Am I wrong?
You're right, and you've thrown a few different things out there that I think I want to touch on. But also, that's about as good of a segue as you could provide for me to let these gentlemen, you know, maybe share some things and for us to look at the latest site plan and to talk about some things that are different than they were the last time
Good.
we talked. You know, sometimes it's hard to describe things and to really capture perfectly all of the discussions that we've had that have led us to get to where we are. So as staff, I think we do think that this step is a good step in terms of creating the opportunity to go to the next step. Yet, that being said, we've had extremely candid conversations with the applicant and with you about the concerns. I've appreciated that we've been able to be really open and direct, and nobody's had their feelings hurt. In fact, I think we're on the same page relative to how we feel a contemporary new facility should operate and how they want a new facility to operate. So that being said, I think there absolutely are still questions that need to be answered. There's detail that needs to be shared with you, for that matter, staff and the city council. I don't know what all of that is. So relative to this language and, for example, dust, at this point in time, I'm not sure that, well, in fact, I'd go a step farther. I'm certain that we're not ready to talk about what all of the criteria should be that we spell out for the operators to follow in order to have a facility approved. We certainly have some ideas, and I think we've certainly got to the point where we believe that with the right conditions in place, the facility doesn't need to be a bad neighbor. But we still have another step to get to before I think we're really ready to talk about how this could be good for the community in a more detailed way.
So why do you feel we need to adopt this now then? I mean, the first amendment we went over will directly impact another item on the agenda. Why do we need to go over this? Why do we need to adopt this now when we don't even know specifically from this, applicant if we have anything coming or not?
I'll say I had that thought a minute ago. Honestly, it doesn't need to be adopted now. Absolutely, we could wait and we could put their site plan and a proposal to implement this zone on your agenda like we do sometimes. And take just one big bite at the apple one night. And I think if you're more comfortable with that, then that makes me really comfortable with that approach.
I'm more comfortable knowing where that's heading at that point,
Getting down to-
instead of having this and then not knowing where this tool is going to be used later on.
Yeah. For me, it'd be interesting as well, if that's the way we're gonna do it, to send out the public hearing, get the public's input at the same time. Just have one big meeting where everybody comes and talks and then make a decision.
If you're comfortable with that, I'll let the applicants speak for themselves.
Seems like a bit like a dance. Who takes the first step and who follows? And it appears to me that, the dance is scheduled, the band is playing, but now we're being requested to be taking the first step. I know that that's not entirely true, but nonetheless, we have a document before us that allows something that we've been very hesitant about
And I understand this has never been done before. That's an easy answer. It hasn't been done because it can be done, but it's too expensive. So we find another place to put it. It's as simple as that. It's follow the money. You know, Sunrock's got the property. It's a great location. I don't discount that at all. It's a great location for a lot of things. And so, is this the direction you want to go with so many things that are fluid still? What are we going to do? How is it going to be implemented? Who's going to monitor it? Who's going to enforce it? What are our options? We don't know, but we're being asked to lead in that dance. And I'm a little bit nervous about that without, you know, I want to hear from these gentlemen tonight because, to tell you the truth, in the previous meetings we've had, we haven't had any real solid answers to that. And dust suppression is something that can be performed. It's supposed to be performed in all sites, you know, construction sites. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But anyway, I'm not saying that this is something we need to run from. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I'm just saying, are we leading here and there's going to be a step to follow from our partner, or are we going to be left out there hanging in the wind and then have a lot of pressure put on us because we provided the instrument to start this dance?
I think it's really time to hear from the applicants.
Me
But
too.
just one maybe final thought, you know, kind of to the idea of, before I say that, I'm very comfortable. I think everybody on staff is certainly, if you want to simply take more time with this, if you want to take more time with this with the idea that you don't want to act on this until we have the other pertinent applications ready for you to consider, which we have done. That's oftentimes with development proposals, we would act on zoning only when we have all of the specifics ready also for you to consider. So that's really easy for me to buy into, and I appreciate that. And I don't want you to think that I'm trying to persuade you at all to feel otherwise, but maybe to the merit of a different incremental approach here. Things to consider. They don't need to be decision drivers, but if this were in place, then I do think we as staff and working with the applicants would have a little more clear framework to work within as we get the other applications ready to present to you. I don't want to speak for the applicants, but this would give them a little bit more assurance as they go from where they are now, with the plans that we'll look at tonight, that they haven't necessarily spent tens of thousands of dollars on. The plans that will certainly cost them tens of thousands of dollars to prepare as part of that next step. So that assurance, I think, is something that they likely would appreciate. But beyond that, I would say this. I think if you feel that this approach in any way, shape, or form just is not going to work, we certainly want to hear that tonight. We wouldn't want necessarily to take any more of your time if you feel like this is just bad or otherwise it just isn't going to work. Please tell us that for sure. But beyond that, we can make the process work however you want.
Well, one thing I'm a little confused on is this, the fact that it wasn't approved for the current zoning is tonight the very first I heard this, the part about the crusher. Because we've had a lot of discussions about this going where it's proposed, and zoning or the fact that it couldn't be there never came up. It's the first I've heard that. So is that something that somebody's caught and said, oh, there's a crusher here and that's not a part of it?
That's funny, I think.
Okay.
Probably illustrates something we should have been more specific about. But the only reason that we've talked with the Planning Commission and City Council about this is the crusher. If the crusher were a permitted use, then they simply would have applied to have a site plan approved on that existing site, staff would have reviewed that, staff would have approved it, and there would have never been any dialogue with you or the city council. It literally would have been that simple. The only reason that we've had any of these conversations is that crushing part of the operation. So we maybe weren't real specific about that, which again, I regret maybe. It seems odd. Yet I don't remember ever being real specific. So
And maybe it was,
When we went out and did the tour, we did,
we seem to focus on the crusher.
on the crusher, we
and,
did listen to the
That's a
crusher.
big part of
Yes.
why we went.
yes, I remember that visit and stuff. I just don't remember any conversation that we've heard about this new location, the fact that it's not even permitted.
Well,
I assumed it was permitted, and our discussion was more about the detail. How high is the fence going to be?
yeah,
The dust, those other things.
we could get hung up on the semantics of what permitted means, but in the legal sense of a zoning use being permitted, it would just be an administrative approval, like I said, to allow for that change if everything was permitted. And
Okay.
if we were to maybe try to break down what they do on the Arrowhead Trail site and what they want to do up here into 4 or 5 different uses, crushing would be one of those. The others would all be permitted uses. So that's really the only thing that's kind of put them through this gauntlet of scrutiny
I
and
see.
that type of a thing. And that's why, so this language that we're talking about, if people weren't more concerned, I think, about what sometimes happens on facilities that do some of these types of things, it absolutely could look like we're trying to use a bazooka to kill a mosquito, I think. You know, literally, this is all about that crusher. That's,
Which
Okay.
for me, the crusher wasn't an issue. I didn't think the sound was an issue when we
that's interesting,
went
right?
out.
I think so too.
The issue for me has always been the dust and having.
Which largely is not coming from the crusher, right?
Yeah, exactly. And living near the current location, yeah, you see the dust quite a bit. I think moving it to the new location would be great as far as the trucks go, because now you've got trucks that can get on the freeway easier, especially with more residential going down in that area. I hate when I get off the freeway at Benjamin and get stuck behind a Sunrock truck. It's awful. I'd rather they be in the north location. But to take what they're currently doing, you know, in their current location and moving it where they want to without any changes wouldn't be good based on the dust. And so I'd love to hear from the applicants, explain what's different now from what you've proposed in the past.
Well, good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Brandon Henry with CLYDE Companies. Do I state address for the record? I don't know if I need to state.
No.
Okay. Been on a planning commission. Usually they require that we state our address for the record. However, it's out of state. Thanks for your time this evening. I know we've had a number of discussions over the last year and a half or so regarding this project. And a lot of good questions. I'll try to address those questions, but before addressing those questions, I thought I could walk you through an idea of what the site plan would look like. I know we're not here tonight to discuss the specifics of the site plan. We're here tonight to discuss a text amendment that would allow us to submit application on this site plan. But it is a little bit of a dance, a little bit of chicken before the egg. We want to make sure that that city staff, members of the Planning Commission and Council feel comfortable with the direction that we're heading, and so that we can begin moving forward with our plans. This gives an idea of what we're proposing for what a current site plan could look like. As you look at this specific site plan, there's a number of things that are significantly different from the current site where Sunrock is located. For one, the aesthetics, as we've had discussions with city staff over the last several months, it has shifted away from the crushing being the concern, though that is why we are asking for this text amendment, is so that we can allow our operations to continue.
But there's really been a focus on two things. One has been the aesthetics. What is the operation going to look like, and does it add value or detract value from the surrounding neighbors? And does it blend in as a normalized part of the community? And then second is the dust mitigation, and how can we limit the environmental impact of a site like this? We were asked to go show another facility and potentially go out and do a site visit of another facility that we're trying to model this site after. We found one or two locations that incorporate some of the best practices that we're trying to incorporate in this site. In the Northeast, in the Connecticut area, we didn't feel like it was valuable enough, and they incorporated enough best practices for us to warrant a site visit with members of the Planning Commission and City Council. So we've shown city staff a number of videos and tried to create renderings that allow us to illustrate what we're trying to do and paint a picture that can allow you to make a decision. So one of the things that you'll notice about the site plan is the amount of paving or crushed asphalt that is laid throughout this site. Again, I'll let Sam Bernard speak after me to the environmental impact of what we're trying to do to mitigate dust, and then what controls we have in place to be able to monitor dust, which is another important aspect of this. But as you see throughout the site, all of the main thoroughfares where trucking operations will be on paved roads or crushed asphalt roads, which again drastically limits the amount of dust that a site like this would occur. Secondly, there is a 6-foot masonry wall that surrounds this. We plan on putting up a landscaping and wall to better impact the aesthetics of this operation. I want to give you a few views of what we anticipate this would look like based upon renderings from the Northeast. You can see what the Northeast view looks like. From the Southeast, you can see what the Southeast view would look like of a facility like this. And then from a street level view, this is these are, again, best practices that would be unique to Spanish Fork City, putting up a 6-foot masonry wall around the facility, and as well as the buffer between the street and the landscape buffer between the street and the wall, and us putting in the landscaping. Again, we consider it best practice, and a great buffer between the street and the actual facility. Here's a bird's eye view from the south of what the facility would look like. We tried to incorporate the size of the stockpiles based upon what you can see from the street, so that the distance from the block wall and the distance or the height of the wall limits your ability to see stockpiles and to see anything that's behind the wall, so it doesn't, again, infringe on any of the neighbors.
Brandon, what sides has the 6-foot wall in your illustration? I can see it there.
It's on
the east side and the north side of the facility. The west side and the south side of the facility. So south side. Great. So this is the east side of the facility. It comes up to it's 400 South Springville. I'm trying to think of Spanish Fork.
It's 177. State Route 177.
State Route 177. I made that mistake before. Sorry for mentioning Springville this week.
So that's the north side that you would have it?
So this is the north side where we would have the 6-foot block wall. On the east side, we'd have the block wall. The transfer station is going to be over in this area here. And then we would berm both the south and the west side until future development. We would plan on writing into the development agreement. At that point, we would either build or share the cost of building that wall with the adjacent neighbors once development occurs.
You guys plan on putting this road in at the same time on the northern piece of property? I'm just wondering what the purpose of this is.
This road right here.
This road, right? Because this is
Oh.
Sunrock property as well, right?
It is.
Is there a reason why this is in the drawing?
It's just for rendering purposes, and so I don't think that road.
They're not actually planning on doing anything at this time with the north property?
We do have plans, not internally, but adjacent neighbors. We do have plans to develop this space, or the north 40 acres, in the short term. Again, we feel like there are some interesting industrial opportunities that could come down here and meet current zoning needs and still be good neighbors to us and vice versa.
Those people, obviously, if you're trying to sell or get other industrial, they wouldn't have concern with this, with what you guys do in the facility.
No, and we've talked to this property owner as well. They may or may not have submitted application for plans on that adjacent property, but they're highly interested in us going in here. They feel like it's a complementary use for what they would want to do on the property as well. Again, whether the city agrees with that, I don't know. But this neighbor has been very cooperative, and then the transfer station also has been very cooperative. We've talked through engineering plans on utility and road work and sharing some of the costs in the offsite infrastructure with that group, which they're excited about the prospects of that.
What's to the south for a neighbor, where the berm is? Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, so the south is a group, San Miguel, is that it? I don't know, Cordillera, is it? I don't know how to pronounce it. It's the drone group that owns
General Atomics, if you're familiar with
Okay, yeah.
their facility, the same company owns the land that's adjacent to this site to the south.
So I guess my question is, why berm the south and not treat it like you have the east and the north?
Just because it's undeveloped at this point.
Okay, that's why.
And so again, once it develops, I think plans, we would need to write into a development agreement some sort of trigger in terms of putting in wall. But until that happens, we felt like a berm was appropriate.
Okay, thanks, Brandon.
You know, the fugitive dust, and this is again where I'd like for Sam to jump in here. And so Sam, maybe you could take over and talk through the fugitive dust regulation, and then I can come back and address other questions that you may have. I want to make sure you get any questions answered, but I'll let Sam Bernard discuss fugitive dust and again, dust control.
So my name is Sam Bernard. I work with CLYDE Companies. That's the parent of Sunrock Corporation. I am a part of the Property Environmental Group. Under that group, we oversee 130 properties in 6 states. This operation that they're proposing as far as crushing, there's a couple things I just wanted to get across because I'm kind of being brought into it a little bit after or further down the road. So with the crushing of the material, it's not going to be taking place full time. So I take, for instance, our Orem facility, which is our largest facility in Utah County, where we make hot mix asphalt, ready mix concrete, as well as we process haul back recycled asphalt and then concrete. So for instance, right now it's winter time. We had millings that came off of the job in the fall, or projects in the fall, and we're currently crushing that material down right now. So throughout the year at that facility, we crush probably 8 to 10 weeks per year, and that's just when they come in, they crush the material out, and then that group moves on to another facility. So crushing doesn't take place on a daily basis. It's more or less once there's enough material on site that they bring in a portable track crusher to crush the material. So it's not on an everyday basis there, as well as the type of crusher that's being used. So you have, given the nature of the material, say if you were at Pelican Point, you would have a primary jaw that crushes down native material. Those are 60-inch jaws that just impact the material itself. This is considered a secondary or a tertiary crusher, where the material has been used in a previous manner, with it being the recycled asphalt. Then from there, it's less of an impact on the material. So it's not a primary jaw, it's a secondary or a tertiary jaw that's being used in order to impact the material to break it down.
And this site will only be used for asphalt, or will it be for concrete as well?
Let me just ask Brandon, or refer to Brandon.
It's concrete and asphalt.
So concrete and asphalt, yes. So I'll just go through this here and then kind of just, there's a map.
Sam, one other question. So you have, this has never been done anywhere before, only in Northeast, there might be one that's similar. What are the differences between what you have either here or in Orem? What are those specific differences? What makes this so unique?
Yeah, so I'll have to answer that question, Sam.
Sorry, I thought Sam could answer that.
I'm gonna go back. Oh, I'm just gonna go back to the slide. So, first of all, again, putting a 6-foot wall with landscaping is going to be unique to a facility like this.
So it's the aesthetics that's making it unique?
So aesthetics is one factor that's making it unique. The second is the paved roads throughout the entire site for general traffic. If you're familiar with again, the Sunrock facility, the current location, all of the roads that all of the mainstream trucks are coming in and out of our dirt roads.
Okay.
And so that's probably, again, I'll let Sam speak to that, but that's probably the biggest driver of dust particulates are trucks driving on the site. It's traffic on the site, and specifically being on dust roads. So having a facility that has roads throughout is unique to the industry. We also have a watering system on our stockpiles and crushing facility. That's not unique to this specific site. It is a best practice across sites so that you're constantly watering. You have water trucks going throughout any of the dirt roads, but you also are watering down the actual stockpiles.
Okay. So the differences are then aesthetic, way you're landscaping and defining the site,
Yep.
and the paving or recycled asphalt you're using for your roadways.
Yes.
I think as a commission, our concerns had been dust and noise from the crusher, which sounds like it's no different than other facilities. Dust from loading and unloading trucks and traffic. Like Richard brought up, how are you going to keep your dust off your roads even if they are paved? Because we recognize a lot of that was from traffic going in and out of the facility. So it sounds like in those aspects, you're no different than other sites.
No, that's not accurate.
Okay, well then tell me where I'm not accurate at.
So on the crushing side, my understanding has been that has not been a concern since the time of the site visit, that it's been aesthetics and dust control around the traffic, that's been the primary concern. There hasn't been a concern about the dust particulates that the crusher causes because it is so insignificant. I could be wrong there, but that's our understanding of what.
That would explain how I feel. The crusher wasn't, after seeing the crusher and the amount of dust or whatever that comes off the crusher, that wasn't a concern for me.
Okay.
So the crusher itself, the sound, everything else, that for me, and that's just speaking for myself, I don't know about the other commissioners, but that wasn't a concern for me.
And that was the indication that we received from staff and from council and other commissioner members as well, was that the issue wasn't around the crusher. To address your second point, again, having paved and asphalted roads in terms of dust mitigation, it is a significant difference from what had been presented in the past and from other sites. And again, I'll let Sam speak to the specifics of the dust impact that has. I know that Sam has a number of metrics, and I'll let him jump right to that. But the reduction of dust as a result of that is significant in the plan. I think the third aspect that has always been a concern is also around regulation. And it's a concern that we've brought up too, to say, how is the city of Spanish Fork, how do they plan to regulate? We self-regulate, and we follow state regulation for all of our sites. But is there additional regulation Spanish Fork City imposes on sites like this or sites throughout Spanish Fork City? Doesn't seem that there is any type of regulation. So what we are hoping to do is be able to lead in this regard as well, and hopefully provide ways that Spanish Fork City can regulate if needed, our site and other sites, because we do think there should be accountability around control.
So within the state of Utah, this facility is governed by the Department of Environmental Quality, and more specifically, their Air Quality Division. So if a citizen is concerned about fugitive dust that's coming off a property, say if you are constructing a home or you're a developer, they can reach out to the Department of Environmental Quality, and they'll send an inspector out to do what's known as a Method 9 observation, and that's just the visible emissions that's being generated from that facility. As Brandon had mentioned, most of the fugitive dust that you see at some of these projects tend to come from vehicle wheel traffic. So the EPA has in place different metrics that I use on an annual basis and sometimes on a monthly basis to come up with the amount of fugitive dust that's being generated. The biggest consideration that we take into account when we're submitting for application to the EPA as well as the state is they put into place an annual limitation, depending on the facility, the amount of emissions that we can emit from the facility. So they say, hey, if you're going to have a dirt road on that property, that can be used, but you also can use a paved road. And when you introduce a paved road, there's less fugitive dust that's generated on that paved road, because that paved road can be at that point swept, or that paved road can now be sprayed down with water or watered on a regular basis to reduce the amount of fugitive dust that's generated by the vehicle wheel traffic there.
And do you do that as needed, or is it like on a daily basis, hourly basis, or?
So it's more or less as needed, but in some places we do have it on a regular basis. You take the Point in the Mountain facility, for instance, that's our largest facility. We have trucks running during all hours of operation, just giving the amount of asphalt that we have at that facility in the key areas where trucks are hauling from unpaved roads onto paved roads. So they pay more attention there, or the trucks are really focused on that area there in order to reduce the amount of fugitive dust. And with that facility, last year they processed a little bit over 4.5 million tons of material, and we didn't have any notice of violations at that facility for excessive emissions. So the state does come out randomly when we notify the state that we do have a facility, and they do surprise checks, if you will, at the facility to make sure that the crushing operation falls within the federal standard there.
So when there's a decent sized storm, the wind's really bad.
Yep.
With your current facility, and the dust gets pretty bad, there have been multiple occasions where that happens. What leads to that? Does that mean the water trucks are not being used as they should be, or what causes that?
So with the excessive dust, say in a high windstorm or a high windstorm event, what should take place normally is when we submit our fugitive dust control plan, within that application it shows what processes are going to take place at the facility. And the first one that comes to mind is, hey, if we're crushing material or materials placed, the water trucks are supposed to go around and place water on it to form a crust. So you have a pile of material, water's been placed on it, a layer or a crust, if you will, has been formed. When they pull from that material, it's only disturbing that specific area there, so that will help reduce the amount of fugitive dust that can leave the pile itself. So on high wind events, depending on the surface area that you have there, if it's just regular surface area, ideally the water truck would go down and create a coat. But in some cases, we're not there, after hours or around the clock. So that sometimes becomes the challenge when the winds tend to pick up in the afternoon hours as well as in the mornings. In the mornings, we can mitigate it, but when it's later in the afternoons and operations have shut down, the DEQ says, hey, you're not necessarily responsible at that point, but we want to make sure you do, or you are following your best management practices prior to closing the facility by forming a crust on that disturbed area.
What would those hours of operation be?
I have to, for Brandon.
Traditional business hours.
9 to 5, 8 to 5.
So here, I took these standards based off of the EPA. So the EPA has what's known as the AP42, and I use those multipliers on an annual basis to come up with the amount of fugitive dust that are generated from a paved road and an unpaved road there. So paved road with recycled asphalt, you're gonna see with 5,000 miles traveled annually on each surface, you have roughly 80 pounds of what's known as PM10s, and this is kind of the sidestepping or nerding out just for a second here. So when you look at emissions, there are a couple ways to look at it. You have PM10s that are typically visible to the eye. Then you have PM2.5s that's generated from the combustion of fuel. With the combustion of fuel, you then have sulfur that's or SOx that's emitted, nitrous oxide, and then VOCs or volatile organic compounds. So at this facility here, we're not running one of our larger 1,600 horsepower generators. It's a pole-powered crushing operation. The majority of the emissions that are going to be generated at that facility are going to be at the drop points as well as on the roads themselves. So as Brendan had shown in that 2 previous slides, the majority of the facility will be paved around the perimeter. The activity that takes place within the crushing area is based on the recycled asphalt around that perimeter there, and that's where the big haul trucks are bringing in material that's going to be crushed down, and as I mentioned, not on a daily basis, compared to an unpaved road. So on our unpaved roads there, that's just for like a regular dirt road that you might have out in the field, where you're going to see a lot of those PM10s that's visible to the naked eye there. So that's based on 5,000 miles that a vehicle will travel over either a dirt road or a recycled or paved road there. But with the paved road being in place, we have the opportunity, as I mentioned, to water that road, spray it with the water trucks, or sweep the excessive emissions that's generated on that road. So kind of put it in perspective as well. So this is based on, that's a Ford F-350 that I had found online. The EPA says that the average vehicle in 2018, our light passenger truck traveled 13,476 miles. So what I did there was made the assumption that, hey, if you're just driving down a dirt road or if you're out in the Midwest somewhere, the multipliers that the AP42 would use, how many pounds of emissions annually would be generated from that truck traveling down a dirt road. So if it traveled the 13,476 miles, you're looking at about 20,000 pounds of PM10 that's just generated from the wheel, from the vehicle wheel traffic on that road on an annual basis. So you look at the crusher here. So I took this crusher into place. This is a fast track KPI JCI crusher. That's just the kind of the make and the model of the crusher. It's track mounted. So it's track mounted, so it can move around the facility. What typically will happen is you'll have a loader come and place the material here where it will be crushed down, and then it will be sized through the screens that are in place, and then you have piles that the material will go into. So with this unit, I figured there'd probably be a total of 8 drop points on this unit, a total of 8 drop points. But those drop points will be suppressed with water or spray bars at each one of the drop points to reduce the amount of fugitive dust that's generated at the drop point itself. So this is based on 150,000 tons of material. The process would be controlled opposed to uncontrolled, where in some areas where they're fairly remote, we do use an uncontrolled method depending on the type of the material, so we're not gumming up the piece of equipment. but best management practices require that we do use a controlled process in order to control the fugitive emissions there. So this crusher here would emit roughly 684 pounds of PM10s annually, as long as we have spray bars that's emitting water to all of the drop points at the facility. So you have the vehicle truck traffic that's traveling around the perimeter of the crushing area on a paved surface, but this is taking into account our best management practice of placing water at each one of the drop points as the material is conveyed through the conveyors onto the ground. The one area that we have what's known as uncontrolled is when the loader is pulling from a pile and then placing it into the crusher. There's no way to really control that fugitive dust, if you will, as it's being placed. So it would be considered uncontrolled there. But we do have the spray bars or water wagon that is following this unit. And we currently have this similar unit, as I mentioned, set up in Orem. And from there it'll head up to, actually we have two set up currently. One in Orem and then one at 3900 South, and that's just kind of how they operate. It's just as needed, and when there's enough material on site, they can crush. So here, this was another option that they, at one point they had looked at, and it was placing magnesium chloride on the road itself. So magnesium chloride is really just a salt, if you will. So they'll go around and place that mag chloride on unpaved roads. So kind of taking a step back to the nerdy part of it, if you will. So you have an unpaved road, and then you have different ways in which you can reduce your fugitive emissions. Unpaved roads, you can use water or mag chloride, and then the most effective is to pave the road itself. So they had reached out to me at one point and said, hey, what would be the most effective way to do it? And I said, it's just paving. It's a lot easier, less maintenance. And with the mag chloride works great on long, consistent haul roads where the vehicle wheel traffic is not breaking up the mag chloride on the road. But given the turning of the radius on those four corners were my concerns as far as placing the mag chloride and kind of the return on the investment. Paving or placing that asphalt is the preferred method ideally to do. There are a lot of operations throughout the Wasatch Front that don't go through this, don't go to the extent of paving the interior roads, but with this facility, it has an established traffic pattern that the trucks will follow. So that helps out a lot as well as far as the amount of fugitive dust that's emitted from the facility, as well as the key thing I keep reiterating is it's going to be a paved road where we can spray down at the end of the day, or we can sweep it as well. And this was just showing the mag chloride process, but I don't think that we will be using the mag chloride process, but that's just a typical paved road. I think on average, a vehicle traveling 1 mile generates about 1.5 pounds of PM10s on an unpaved road there. So it's quite a bit of dust over time that's disturbed in that area. Even though the fallout is fairly close to the road, it is in some cases a site for storage. And that's the end of the presentation there, but
Isn't it true that the mag chloride also, when it gets extremely wet after a rainstorm, for instance, it is picked up and deposited onto the vehicle tires underneath, and it's almost like, sets up almost like concrete.
yes, that is correct.
It's a great product.
Yep.
But you have to be careful because you can have it spread all over the place.
Correct. We do use it at a facility that's down south of here. It's in Levan. I call it, it's our Chicken Creek facility, but in Levan. But it's on one of the main haul roads that parallels the main road into the town itself, and it works perfectly. Or not say it doesn't work perfectly, but it works extremely well, given that they're just going north on that road. Then west on the road itself, so there's just kind of one angle that they're breaking the surface at, but it does reduce the amount of fugitive dust at this.
One other question is, what's the standard that they use, that the state uses? They have hundreds, if not thousands, of monitors now for air quality. And there's a bunch of them in Spanish Fork. There's a map that you can pull up any one of those, and they're color coded and stuff. What are they checking for there? Is it PM10, PM5, 2.5?
Great question. So they're typically checking, so how those systems actually work out, let me just kind of go to the root of it. There's a cartridge that's in the unit itself, and it's similar to an individual that's breathing. So it's set in place, and that cartridge is weighed when it's first put in place, then it's zeroed out, and then it's weighed again. So it's saying, hey, during this duration, this is how many micrograms per 4 hours or 12-hour basis, depending on how they're checking it. They weigh it out and say, hey, this is the air quality index at that point or another. So they are checking typically for PM10s as well as PM2.5s, VOCs, NOx, and SOx, but they're just weighing it out. At that point or another, it's just the weight of the materials itself. So it depends on where it's placed at, as well as what's happening in the area. So if there's a subdivision that's taking place, or excuse me, that's being disturbed, it's obviously within that specific area, the air quality is going to be poorer, if you will. But it's not a true representation for the entire area, as well as you have to look at duration, how long you're out in that environment, as well as the intensity of the material, the intensity of the pollutant.
Just a sidebar to that, there's one site in Spanish Fork that goes into the moderate category every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I found out why. The individual goes to work at that time, goes out, smokes 2 cigarettes before he gets in his car. By 7 o'clock it's cleared.
Okay, yeah.
So they're pretty delicate.
Yes, yeah, they're pretty delicate, and they're, I work with the state on a daily, if not weekly basis in regards to our facilities. And as I mentioned, I've been with the CLYDE group now for 5 years, and we've had one notice of violation, and that was from a hot plant, and the material just got a little bit too hot, if you will, and it created a visible emission. But as far as excessive emissions due to the lack of watering of roads, we have not received any penalties or citations in the past 5 years, as well as you can go on Google Earth and look at our largest facility, which is the Point of the Mountain, and look at the roads historically back for the past 10 to 15 years, and you'll see there's moisture on the road. So it is something that we do. We use quite a bit of water on a regular basis in order to keep that fugitive dust down on the roads.
It was mentioned that CLYDE Company intends to only operate during normal business hours. I was observed in other places like the Point of the Mountain. When you have operations that are going for whatever purpose, sometimes they go well into the night and sometimes 24 hours. Crushing operation, there is one offshore at the mouth of the canyon now, and they stockpile a lot of the material when they crush. They crush 24 hours, try to get out of there within a week or a little more. Will this site also go longer when they crush to try and get done and move that crusher to another site, or will you stay within the hours of operation?
Yeah, it'll stay within the hours of operation. Generally, with those other sites, they're leasing crushing equipment, and so the equipment lease ends up being substantial enough that they run it 24 hours to be able to maximize the lease on that piece of equipment. With most of our equipment, we own it, and so we won't bring on additional shifts outside of traditional hours for crushing. I mean, anytime we are crushing, it generally is, as Sam mentioned, we're stockpiling material, and then it's 10 business days of crushing as we stockpile to crush it and then to go recycle and reuse it within the community.
But you anticipate that business days will be within normal business hours?
Yeah, within normal business hours.
Do you have any idea what the volume or traffic will be? Like how many trucks per day or per week or?
I know we'll be able to address that when we do the actual site plan. I couldn't tell you specifically. I mean, I know it'll be similar to what's at the current facility, but I don't know how many loads are coming and going from that facility today.
You also mentioned you'd shared with staff several videos or pictures. Are they things we've seen tonight, or is there other material that we could be viewing?
No, it's things that we've shown tonight. I'm trying to think, we've shown other examples as well.
I saw some videos of sites.
Yeah.
I want to say it was more like Minnesota, Wisconsin, something like that.
Yeah.
Trees everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, not really representative of what something's going to work like here. A different climate, wetter, all those kinds of things. I remember that.
Yeah, we showed some pictures of berms when we were discussing berms versus doing an actual wall. And we landed on wall being more aesthetically pleasing, so we decided to take that route. Again, on the what's the name of the material? Magnesium chloride. We discussed that with staff at one point as being a solution. We opted to just do paved roads, which again, to address your question earlier, I think that was a change that we've made, is to have crushed asphalt or paved roads versus a magnesium chloride, even though magnesium chloride drastically reduces the dust particulates. We felt like paved is the best option, so that was another item.
Go ahead, John.
I've been in the Northeast a couple of times in the last few years and seen a couple of gravel operations. They seem to be more pits, and I would even call them quarries, where they have actually dug down, mined the material, and it's been done in the bottom of the pit. And they traditionally fill up with water if they don't pump them.
Yep.
And so they're very wet environments, and kind of hard to compare the two things because of just the weather, the humidity, and the material that they're mining.
Yeah, I think that's really accurate. I mean, we were looking at a facility in Boise as a potential site visit, and it's the same issue. I mean, because of the water table with in Boise, the Boise River, all of the facilities up there have pumps running 24 hours a day, and so that changes. I mean, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
How will it compare to the Kilgore site out on West Mountain? That's not your company, I understand, but you've got to have an eye on that, knowing that that question's going to come up.
Right. So I chair the environmental committees, or excuse me, the AGC's environmental committee for the state. So I do work with Kilgore on a regular basis in work sessions, if you will. That is a challenge for them. They're at that facility. They are producing, kind of taking a step back. I believe at one point they were running these larger generators. So the concern there was the amount of PM 2.5s, or just the more or less the criteria or the harmful pollutants there. So they do have longer haul roads, but the operations are separate. They are recycling material, but they are producing hot mix asphalt, and that's on a daily basis. As far as the truck volume, somebody might say, hey, I need 15,000 tons might be going out the door in a day, but at this facility here, annually, or take for instance Payson, the Payson facility that Geneva Rock owns, we have a permit where we can crush 50,000 tons of material per year, and on paper I'm bringing in a crusher maybe 2 weeks out of the year to crush down that material, 2 to 3 weeks out of the year, because we don't get anywhere near 50,000 tons of material hauled back to the facility.
And that's the one on North Main Street where you have the batch facility as well?
Yes, sir. So we have a permit there in place with the Department of Environmental Quality for the entire facility. In 2018, I updated it to have the crushing operations, which could take place on a regular basis, but the state put a cap on the amount of material we could process at the facility. then we also have to have that fugitive dust control filed with the state, and the state drops in on a regular basis randomly and checks that facility.
Kind of interesting that they also have a sewage facility across the road.
Yes.
Is there a cap on this site?
So I haven't filed a permit for the facility itself, so what the next process would be for me to do is, once it got approved or makes it through the council, would be to look at the roads that are on the site, the amount of material that could run through the crusher that would keep us as what's known as a minor source. So that would be 5 tons of criteria pollutants, which would be the SOx, NOx, VOCs, PM10s, but they look at them individually. I'm not, so to say, worried about SOx, NOx, or VOCs. It's more or less the PM10s from the vehicle miles traveled, and then from there kind of work around. A third party I send that to, which would be either Kleinfelder or well, Kleinfelder is the one that comes to mind. They would then do the calculations to make sure that we are below the 5 tons of the criteria pollutants. And then at that point, what would be issued is a minor source exemption, where we would be on the state's radar, but it's not like we're emitting above the national air quality standards for a facility.
So you're not a major source, but,
Yeah, so-
but they'll take you as a site instead of as just an individual operation.
Yep, so you have minor source, so it's 5 tons or less, minor source exemption, and then or small source exemption, a minor source, which is 5 tons to 70 tons, and then a major source now is over 70 tons. None of the Geneva facilities are considered a major source. The major source that comes to mind would be like a Kennecott or something like that, given the amount of generators that they run.
Dave, Brandon mentioned either Brandon or Sam when they were speaking, mentioned that the city does not currently regulate like their current operations. There's nothing in place now for the city to do that? It's all dependent on the state for air quality?
I think it'd be very uncommon to find a city that did do that. We've talked a little bit about the idea of maybe having a employee of the city be qualified to perform some of the basic evaluations, the method 9, for example, which is a visual, as I understand it, evaluation as to exactly how much dust is being.
So if there's a wind event and Kevin calls up and says, hey, I'm in a fog over here of dust, the complaint needs to go to the state instead of to the city.
If they called us, we likely would call the state. We might also suggest that they call the state. But the idea of the city having somebody on staff that has some amount of training or qualification to be able to do some of that is also in play for sure. I think we're very open to that idea. I think we see some pros and cons to having the city involved in that loop. Probably the biggest pro would be just our immediate ability to get out and at a moment's notice make an
Yeah, my
evaluation
concern is if
versus-
it's only during business hours, you get one of these summer storms that just comes in
Right.
out of nowhere, and they hadn't watered down because they didn't expect a storm to come in. Dust all of a sudden is everywhere. I need to make a phone call to somebody in the state who knows if they're working regular business hours or not, and when are they gonna come down and look? The storm will be gone probably by the time they get there to see it.
But like I said, I don't think it'd be common for a city to probably have somebody that is qualified to do any kind of inspection work.
I do feel like from what you guys have presented, you've done everything other than actually building a building to confine it all. You've done everything you probably can to mitigate the dust. Still gives us, in my opinion, a lot to think about. As to, is it enough? Is it still what we would want in that location? So I think there'll be some more discussion, obviously, in the future, but I think, in my opinion, I think it'd be a great idea to at least in the next time this comes up, just present the whole thing. Move it towards the zoning change and the overlay change, public hearing, just get it all out there and see what we decide.
I think part of the rationale
as we talked with city staff about submitting it as a text amendment and then as a site plan. Dave mentioned, not giving like too much to bite into in one evening, which I think is a good analogy. I mean, there's also from our end, the initial concern was around a crushing operation, because as Dave mentioned, other than the crushing, for the most part, all of the current use that Sunrock is out at Arrowhead performing, they could perform at this new site. It's all appropriately permitted, but yet for us, if we can't crush and do our operations at this new facility, I don't think there would be an intention for them to relocate from where they currently are. And so I think in good faith, getting the text amendment approved was a step for us of putting the time, the resources into a site plan that works for the city. And again, getting the city on board with a crushing operation out at this 40-acre facility. We felt like there was enough, there wasn't going to be necessarily any additional information that we could provide beyond the site visit and beyond what we've presented tonight, to show that the crushing really is such a minor part of what I think the perceived issues going into a crushing operation with dust, with noise, and with aesthetics that our hope was that we could solve those issues, get something approved and through city council, give the city the ability to and flexibility and weigh in into the actual site itself, but that we're moving forward in good faith versus what I would hate to have happen is for us to end up 3 months from now coming before this planning commission and then having the text amendment get rejected, after spending significant time, resources on a site plan that never was intended to get approved. So I think that was part of the rationale as well, for us coming before you today.
That makes sense.
Is that fair, Dave? Yeah, I think that's exactly how we look at it.
I can see where the text amendments don't in any way tell you that you can go ahead with your project.
Right.
It's the gateway to it, so that you can make application.
With the crusher.
Yeah, I think when we started this conversation back last summer or earlier, that we thought that that's what we were doing then. I know I wasn't aware that the crushing operation was not going to be legal at that site. And so it was the entire proposal. It was a little bit foggy to me, not a little bit, a whole bunch. Especially when we saw some pictures of what's happened out there at your site now. To tell you the truth, if it's not going to be, you're not all that far away from I-15, and Arrowhead Trail is an arterial road from I-15 to your property as it sits now, south of town to Main Street. And if your options are either or, you don't have another plan. In other words, if it can't be built on the north end of town, it's going to stay where it is. I'm not sure why you're saying you want to spend the money, time and effort to move it down there for the sake of maybe 3 miles. But maybe you figured that out, and it's worth the effort, and the miles are worth the effort. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's some strategic reasons for moving again further north, closer to I-15.
Well, the development of the current property is also another.
Yeah.
The development of the current site, changing that to residential. That's the first time I heard of Sunrock even moving was when they came with their site plan to put homes there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of the reason why you want to move is to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in our organization, we are always looking for the highest and best use of any of the ground that we have, which I think fits within what the city wants as well, right? And the
Yeah.
city generally wants the highest and best use for property within the city. And so there's no question that the usage in the surrounding area on Arrowhead, it doesn't lend itself as well for operations indefinitely as in this facility, 10 years from now, we may feel the same way, that it doesn't lend itself into the long-term future and that there's a higher and better use. Happens with a lot of our facilities, we end up relocating, but we feel like it's a higher, better use, at least midterm, for us being over on the other property than being where they're at on Arrowhead.
Dave, a question for you. Does the city, we talked earlier about the lift station that's going to go in down on Arrowhead. Does Sunrock or will Sunrock be contributing to the cost or to paying for that lift station with the development of their current property?
To some extent, they might not be a major contributor.
If this doesn't happen and they stay where they're at and they don't contribute then to that lift station, does that lift station still take place?
I think at this point, the transfer station project is probably going to drive that as much as anything. One thing that, so now, these aren't necessarily decision drivers for us. This isn't why, we've suggested that approving the overlay is appropriate, like an ancillary kind of a benefit, but the development of this site directly supports the ability of the folks with the district and the transfer station and keeping that traffic as far away from Main Street as possible, with the road that would be constructed along their eastern boundary up to the state route. So I think that's probably the biggest benefit right now to the community that we'd see from having this happen.
And I'm talking about the lift station that we looked at on the map earlier on Arrowhead. Sorry, I might have not stated that where.
Yeah,
Does that happen? Does the city pay their portion and everyone else if Sunrock isn't a part of that?
That hasn't happened yet because Sunrock hasn't been able to contribute yet. Is how.
So the reason we don't have it right now is because Sunrock has not been able to.
No.
This.
No.
I'm trying to understand
just
the whole process.
as open as I can be.
It's a blunt question, and so
this is the most honest way I can answer that.
The most honest
If you
way.
would have asked me in 2017 if that lift station was going to be built in 2018, I would have said yes.
Okay.
Because at that point in time, it seemed like, folks with Sunrock were working on, for example, relocating the facility to a site in Provo. That seemed like a lock. It seemed like all the pieces were coming together fast. The other party was as ready to go then as they are now. We were ready. We hadn't designed anything at that point, so that would have affected the timing of being able to get it built. But certainly back a couple of years ago, I thought the development of that lift station was really imminent.
So it's
and
fair.
then some different things, fell through really that impacted Sunrock's ability to relocate. Therefore, they have not been interested in redeveloping the property short term. And we've gotten even to the point, so this maybe to bring things to kind of our contemporary time, understanding that potentially Sunrock's going to remain where they are, we've started to explore plans B and C about how we maybe fund this without that other partner participating in that type of a thing.
So it's fair to say then that an added benefit to this proposal and possibly the future move of Sunrock to that location would be the building or the installation of that lift station.
I think so, and I would go as far as saying I think the residential development of that site. you know, in accordance with the plans that they've submitted, that absolutely is a benefit for the community. Now, that being said, you're not asking me to clarify anything, but I want to. I don't think we've viewed that as being in any way, shape, or form the justification for sacrificing anything on the north end of the community as well. So I don't think we've let down our guard, or that we're suggesting that we drop any standards in order to help facilitate that. But unsolicited again, but I think the residential development at that site that they have, the views are hard to appreciate unless you've been on it, and you can see, I mean, it has a tremendous amount of potential to be a very good thing for that whole part of the community, so.
Dave, another question for you is that as I've read through this, and I've read through it several times now, and to be perfectly honest, this has been created for a specific situation, and we have all the parties here right now. However, it's also a tool that will be used in the future for other places. No doubt. I mean, we're going to go into different areas of the community and probably have similar things happen. Probably not a gravel operation, probably not a crusher. But in this particular case, we have things that cover that. But this is a tool that the city could use for other things, at least the way that I read it. What is written here now deals specifically with this operation. Nowhere in this document do I see that it says that they are going to be granted permission to build this facility there. Everything that I see here says that this will be something that the city council must approve. And the city council will be the ones that set or agree to the parameters that are set at that time. Is that an accurate description?
That's the role they play. Yeah.
So my question is, to the commissioners, would it be wise for us to go ahead and recommend this approval to the city council, because this is what we'll be doing, is recommending this approval, right? We're not approving this.
Whenever it happens, whenever you take formal action, that's what it would be, is a recommendation.
As a recommendation. Is that something that we want to do now? In other words, we still have a lot of questions. They have some answers. We've heard some answers tonight. I don't know if they're a lot different than the answers that we've heard in the prior 6 months, but we got some more.
Yeah.
Would it be wise for us to go ahead and to approve this proposal tonight and let that go to the city council? And they still have the discretion to either accept our recommendation or to go a different direction.
My opinion is that, yeah, I don't see an issue with recommending it tonight, especially considering what you said. This thing gives you the opportunity now to actually focus on presenting a plan to try and get the overlay implemented. Come back to planning commission, city council, and actually try and go through that process. This isn't, like you say, John, this isn't going to say or guarantee then that you're actually moving your facility.
Also in the proposal, we have the DRC has reviewed it and are recommending that it be accepted, that it be approved. And I respect their opinions. They've had much more discussions and much more opportunity to go through this than we have. And so their recommendation to us is to approve it. Our recommendation, should we approve it, or should we make this recommendation, is for the city council to approve it. But it does not necessarily mean that they will approve it. We can also send this along without an opinion, I guess. Or can we? Dave?
We can table it.
We could.
We can also reject it or not make an approval, recommendation, or we can make a recommendation. Those three choices.
All accurate. I know the city council would appreciate your
Comments,
thoughts.
yeah.
Certainly, you know, whether it's a recommendation to approve or deny.
Yeah.
Or you just otherwise sharing, you know, thoughts or feelings in the form of a motion. They certainly look to you as the land use body for the community, so I know that's something they appreciate. But you have a lot of options certainly relative to what you could do.
Commissioner Euler just reminded me, I haven't went into public hearing yet, so maybe we ought to just go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and see where we're at.
Yeah.
So, we're going to go into public hearing, and it might be short-lived. Any comments? Okay, we'll go out of public hearing.
That's close.
I've got a little different feel than you two commissioners on this. Number one, I really appreciate the efforts that Sunrock's done to try to mitigate the dust, which is our biggest concern. And I do think what you've done is going to greatly improve versus all dirt, which is at the other plant. John, you mentioned in the first part of this meeting that have we picked the right location? And I don't know that we've exhausted that as a city, if there's a better location for this. Maybe we have. But we are just moving an operation from one location down to another. Is it going to be improved on dust? Probably. But it's still going to be the same thing that we see in other communities that aren't well received. And is that what we want to do? The way it sits right now, without this text amendment, they can't build down there, or they can't apply because of the crusher. If we approve this text amendment, it's going to open the door for that, if I understand it right, because it includes the crusher. So by deciding this tonight, we are opening the door for a crusher to be there. Right now, it's not. So we have a little bit of leverage there. Only back to the original question, is this the best location for it? And, you know, I don't know that we went down that road yet with neighbors. You know, what's going to happen? Is it the best location? So I don't know that I feel the same as the other commissioners on this. We're going to come to a vote here in a few minutes, but that's kind of where I'm at. You got any comments?
My opinion is similar. I think I voiced this earlier, is I don't know why we need to release this leverage, as you said. Now, you know, that ability. I don't want to shoot down the idea. I can't separate them in my mind. It's your proposal and this go hand in hand. So that's why I want to see why my idea had been to push it back to where we have that proposal, so we have all that information in front of us. This presentation tonight, I thought was much better than the previous one I sat through, and went a long ways to alleviate some of my concerns.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure about location or if it's what we want, so I don't want to give any signals or anything on that. But I would like to, in my mind, I like the idea of having it come to us as in the same meeting, so we have all the information in front of us.
Is there any comment on, from the city or Sunrock, that this is the best place in Spanish Fork City for it? You know, there's been
It's
some
the only
other,
place they own, though.
well, but still, I mean,
Yeah.
you got, I think I've heard the mouth of the canyon where the windmills are. In fact, isn't some stuff going on up there right now in them regards, and that's a different company that's doing that?
Yes,
So
there's a bit there now.
this is a great illustration of just how sometimes we are hamstrung in sharing everything with you guys relative to history. I'm thinking back now to 2 years ago when we were working with employees with Sunrock and there about trying to find another site. This is gonna sound really self-serving, but Spanish Fork City happens to own 40 acres at the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon that we would have loved to have sold to Sunrock to take the facility right there. Still, I think that from our perspective, you know, relative to addressing issues and concerns and that type of thing, in a lot of ways would be an ideal site. But
There's no wind events at the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon.
that's the deterrent. But it's a hole. It's it's somewhat protected from
Yeah.
wind. But operationally, I understood that just in terms of distance from I-15 wouldn't work. And as we thought more about that, we're becoming more and more concerned about traffic on US 6 every day. Just from a volume perspective and adding the type of traffic that enters and exits their facility regularly. Another generator out that way, we didn't think necessarily was good. So we do like the idea that it's as approximate to I-15 as it is. I like the idea that it's on the west side of I-15. I think from a traffic perspective, that's somewhat enticing. Thinking long-term about where you do and don't want to have big truck traffic. I would say that there are very few sites in Spanish Fork that we would in any way think favorably about putting this kind of use on.
There's not a lot of industrial
Yeah.
zone.
In fact, I was trying to think, as you raised the question, do I like the idea? I mean, do we like the idea of it being in Payson, Salem, or Springville, Provo? Oh yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I don't think we necessarily think that this is, from a land use perspective, a home run, yet we certainly acknowledge the CLYDE companies, Sunrock. They are good corporate citizens. Operationally,
Yeah.
the facility has been what it has been. It's really an obsolete kind of a facility. That's my way of characterizing it.
Yeah.
But I think having a company like Sunrock in the community, long-term, as long as something operates a certain way, absolutely could be a good thing. So,
Okay.
Sure would have liked to have seen some of their corporate offices on that other 40 acres.
you know, wouldn't that make the medicine
Wouldn't that
a little
make
bit easier
yeah, you know.
right?
But
Maybe
anyway,
it's
somewhere-
not too late to,
I mean,
We're just a little shocked.
I mean, on the site plan, I mean, there is, we do have a plan for future office there.
Yes.
You know, roughly 10,000 square feet, so it's not insignificant, but it's you know, housing 50 employees or so is what we would plan on in a facility like that. We've talked about the North 40.
That's what you call it, the North 40.
Yeah,
North Fork.
yeah, it's,
Brandon, what can you maybe add to that question I had about a different location?
yeah, on the different locations, I think Dave articulated it really well. We did come to the city 2 years ago and went through an exhaustive list of anywhere within the city that they would consider, and the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon was the piece that we investigated pretty heavily. Dave mentioned the traffic issue up Highway 6. We did feel like as Spanish Fork continues to grow and develop, which it will and is, that if it's 7 minutes now from that location or 8 minutes now from that location, I-15, it could be 16, 17, 18 minutes in the not too distant future. Which makes it operationally more difficult. There were some issues too with some easements that made it difficult also for us to relocate operations down there.
Have you guys approached Springville about any property? Obviously north of where you're at, the transfer station's going away. There's going to be property available there.
Yeah, we have. We've looked in the Provo and Springville area pretty heavily. There could be some options. I mean, we do to be honest with you, I mean, we really like the idea of being across the street from the transfer station.
What is it about that that's so appealing?
It's a neighbor that won't ever bother you.
That's right. It's a neighbor that that is also under a lot of scrutiny.
Big trucks and
Big trucks, smells, perceptions of what a transfer station is and does. And so it does become an area that is enticing from that perspective. Both the neighbors on the east and proposed on the west, we feel like create a good synergy for what we're trying to do. And so we really like that location because of that. But, I mean,
So if Sunrock doesn't move to this north location, what's the likelihood then that you just stay where you're at for an extended period of time?
I think it's pretty high. It wouldn't change the fact that we would continue to look for another facility that met our needs. And again, proximity to I-15 is a very important qualifier for any site that we're looking at. Going further south of Spanish Fork, just development south of Spanish Fork hasn't happened yet. I mean, it hasn't happened in a meaningful way. There's still so much development that has to happen Spanish Fork north, and so much of our operations revolve around that it would have to be Spanish Fork north for us as qualifier. So it would just take some. It's taken a lot of time for us to get to this point. So we would begin the search again, and you know, they would stay operating how they're currently operating in their current facility until we can find a place that's suitable.
Thank you for that explanation, Brandon. Appreciate it. Well, we beat it up pretty good. Somebody want to take a stab at what we want to do?
Do we know?
Well,
Yeah, it's hard because
I know, like Dave says, the council does value our opinion, like they value the Development Review Committee. You know, they do a lot of due diligence. We serve different roles. And I think both of them do pretty good due diligence. The city council would probably like some kind of a...
yeah, there's two things that I'm juggling with. One is that what we want in that location? I feel like they're doing the best they can as far as taking care of our concerns. But still, back to what you said, is that what we want for who knows how long in the future in that location? And then on the other hand, there really is an added benefit to getting their current location developed, putting homes there, and having them contribute to that lift station, because really, once that lift station goes in, I really think we're going to see a lot of change on Arrowhead.
Well, then there's...
I think we're waiting for that lift station.
There's also some benefit, Kevin, I'm sure, down there on the north end to help that development, because they're going to bring in some infrastructure that'll help. So there is some more benefit.
But it's like the two of you said, what we decide tonight, I think, really is opening the door to that.
The infrastructure that would be placed in the north end of town would be advantageous to the development, you know, west of the transfer station and north. And that's a big plus. The other thing that I think the Sunrock is, the CLYDE companies are some of the, I'm going to say one of the top, if not the top, successful companies in Utah. They've made very wise investments, made a ton of money, by acquiring other businesses and stuff. I don't think that they're going to be too awfully shy if in the future there was a large company who wanted to come in and buy the 40 north of them and say, hey, and we want your other 40. The type of business that they're bringing in, you have relatively few structures for 40 acres. It could be cleared and used for another purpose like that.
That's true.
And so if there comes a time that Sunrock, Clydeco, whoever it might be that's the owner of the property, has an opportunity to sell that for a pretty good profit, it would be sold. Because this isn't like a manufacturing company that has literally millions of dollars tied up in equipment and buildings and things like that.
Yeah.
They're awfully hard to look at replacing. And so, because this may be used for this kind of a purpose for a time, it's not set in concrete, even though you get a lot of concrete you can pour. You'll be producing your own block, and you'll be crushing your own material, you know.
You're using a lot of puns, you know.
Yes, I am.
You talked about a ton of money, concrete.
Block, sheetrock, molding, trusses. Anyway, again, my conundrum here is do we go forward with giving the city council this tool to make that decision at this time, or do we ask for more information to do it when everything's together? These guys aren't going to want to do that because they're going to put tens of thousands of dollars towards a plan that's pretty well in concrete, and if it doesn't bear fruit for them, they're just out that money. And they didn't get it. They didn't get all their dollars in making bad investments. So, you know, they're looking for a crack in the door. Doesn't mean that it's going to open wide for them. But do we give them that crack tonight? It won't even be to us that does that. We will recommend to the city council to do that. So that I'm on this razor's edge right now, you know, and because I have a lot of questions and stuff like that, I don't mean to give you guys the impression that I'm against your project or that I don't think it's a good project. But you have to understand that Spanish Fork, in a lot of ways, is in competition with Springville for commercial development. There's a lot of stuff going on in Spanish Fork, a lot of stuff going in on 4th South in Springville as well. And there's some commercial development stuff that's going on north of there. And, you know, there's certain things that attract certain business. What is going to help attract business about this operation? If I am a commercial or an industrial, in this case industrial user, or plan to invest in that, what makes me want to move next to an aggregate operation? It may be that infrastructure's already there. They don't have to spend as much to get the water, sewer, electrical down there. Maybe that turns the tide. But maybe they go, so the same way that, you know, the neighbors on the south end of Spanish Fork are going to be glad to see you go. I'm wondering how many of our neighbors to the north can't wait to see you come. And that's where I'm, you know, so from a personal standpoint and from those questions, I don't know. From this proposal tonight, how do you guys feel? It's all.
Well,
I'll just be restating what I said before.
That's right. So
I think, John, we're kind of both on, you're leaning one way to recommend the change to the zoning, and I'm recommending leaning the other way and not. My feelings aren't strong either way, and I can tell by your comments it's kind of, you know, one or two. Yeah, I just don't see why at this point.
city council meets next week, right? Tuesday.
They do this could be on that agenda, or it could be the one after that either.
if this goes forward without our recommendation, will it still be taken before city council? If we reject it, does it go to the city council?
So if you
With our
recommend, if
with
you
our
recommend
rejection?
that it be denied, or if there's a deadlock, either way,
It goes.
it would go to the city council still.
So I would give these guys the opportunity to make their case with
Yeah.
the city council.
And they would know they'd know our feelings.
And I have a lot of thoughts, and I completely appreciate, maybe not feeling really strongly either way. You can see pros and cons, you balance those, and
I like the
That's
idea of
the
sending it in a deadlock to the council to have them, that conveys our feelings pretty clearly to them.
Is that possible? Does the commissioners, the chair's vote count the same as the mayor's vote?
I'd probably want to double check and see exactly what
Because I'm wondering if we had Richard, then
that's
I know
funny.
we'd have
I
one.
think actually,
Because the mayor's vote doesn't count. He
Yeah.
doesn't vote, so I'm wondering if the chair does.
do you recall or do you have it handy? The bylaws?
Let's just say yes, and we can split it too.
I'm kind of thinking,
We've
the
changed
chair.
over the years, which is why I'm not sure. Once upon a time, the chair did not vote except to break a tie like the mayor.
That's what
But I think when Chairman Gonzalez was chair, we changed that. So the chair votes like anybody else. So for, maybe without having better direction, if you're comfortable with that, I'd say let's operate that way.
Yeah, let's do.
I'm pretty sure what you just explained is right.
I think that.
As in you get a vote.
I don't normally make any motions, but my vote does count.
Okay.
I think so too, yeah.
Well, do we make a motion?
Here's another thing, if there's a motion presented, it could die lack of a second. And then what happens?
We would take it to the city council without action. We've done that, where no vote was made by the commission that was affirmative, either to approve or deny.
Is the video from this meeting, would it be available prior to Tuesday that
Yeah,
city
that's-
council can
that's
watch this?
Partly why, we've teed
Yes.
this up.
It's usually available the next morning.
Is that a yes? Okay.
And to answer your question, you need 3 votes in favor of the measure, and the chair may vote in all motions.
There you go.
I don't think an extra couple of weeks probably at this point is a big concern for the applicants. You're meeting a week later in the month than you typically do, so the first planning commission, the first city council meeting in February is the 4th of February. I think taking a little bit of additional time to give them an opportunity, for example, to view the discussion that you've had and to get up to speed before they act would probably be better at this point than having it on the agenda for next week, so.
Yeah. Just one more thought or question on the fact that this is a public hearing for this text amendment. If this was approved as a text amendment and the city council approved it, would the public get another opportunity to voice their concern about this project in that location? And where would that be? What
So this is
situation?
the zoning text change,
okay?
or the zoning text amendment. In order to employ this, there would need to be a zoning map amendment. So the notice that's provided for this change is simply posted in a newspaper.
Because it's a
and
citywide thing.
because
Yeah,
it's a citywide
where
thing.
the next
step,
one-
It's letters to neighbors within 300 feet.
Okay, that's good to know.
And that.
At least they'll have a chance.
Yeah.
Then they'd come back and actually propose or try and get their property to have this overlay. And that would have a public hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this will come up again no matter what it's on.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we recommend to the city council that this be adopted.
I second the motion. Second the motion.
Okay, Got a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote, starting with John.
I guess I'm gonna vote aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna vote nay.
Nay.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Let the city council decide. Which they do anyways. but-
Isn't that wonderful?
Can I take maybe one more minute?
Yeah.
As has come up a couple of different times tonight, we've had the benefit of staff of having a lot more just discussion about the issue and that type of a thing. It doesn't seem like it, but we really try to be respectful of your time. But at the same time, we want you to be as involved and as informed as you care to be. I don't want to assume anything about what the city council might do, so maybe just say it this way. Is there anything that you would like us to do, or anything that you would like to be a part of before this comes back on a future agenda? We even kicked around the idea a few weeks ago, do we have basically another work session with you and the city council? I really appreciate the time that we spent with Mr. Bernard a month or so ago, and thought it might be good if we just had, in a less formal setting, a chance maybe to ask him whatever questions you might have, offer any suggestions offline that you might have. Is that helpful? Is this the better forum to talk about things in? This proposal is really unique. I doubt that during any of the rest of your terms on the planning commission, you're going to deal with something like this again. I doubt that I will as a Spanish Fork City employee again. So, the need sometimes to ramp up for these unique one-offs is pretty significant. Any thoughts about that?
Dave, I would personally appreciate that kind of an opportunity, and to have some dialogue with the applicants and with other people, and to kick around some of the things that we have tonight. We've been asked to act on this proposal without the same kind of discussion that you have had, and that puts us in kind of an awkward position. I'm neither here, I've said way too much tonight, but I thought it was important that we understand this issue as much as possible. And I really appreciate you guys being here and letting us punch you. Because, that's what we've done, is it's the only place for us to get that information. I hope you know that we don't hate you, we like you, and we want to work with you in every way we can. But by the same token, we have a responsibility to the city. And some of the decisions that are being asked to be made tonight could affect the city for a long time. Specifically, it's just going to affect you right now. But I still think that there could be a time, it may not be with this kind of a proposal, but it'll be one similar. There'll be something else that comes up like this. And this isn't a just an exercise for nothing. I think that other councils, other staff meetings, and other committee, and for us as commissioners, there'll be other meetings where we'll learn something from this, and hopefully we will get better at it, and we'll be better informed through the entire process. And I appreciate you guys coming and responding to us. And like I said, it's great to be able to talk those things out.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Dave, my opinion would be I would welcome those chances for further work sessions. That'd be my opinion on that. I think there's been reference tonight of like future developments, future proposals that I'm not familiar with that would impact my decision on what we're being asked to do currently. So it'd be good to have that information, be able to discuss that information, as well as to be able to get, more information from the applicant and opinions from the commissioners while we're there and staff. So I personally would welcome those on many different applicants or things we'd look at.
I really do appreciate that.
I think it'd be good too. I think these guys have done the best with what they've got to work with. I'll be surprised if there's something else they could pull up their sleeve and say, we're going to asphalt the whole thing, or whatever. Unrealistic. Same thing with covering the whole thing. I'm kind of nervous, concerned about what is going to happen when this does come to public hearing in what we've seen with transfer station in that area. Wasn't there a transfer station even further west near on that, and that was even worse of an outcry. And so, you know, I'm really kind of interested in that. Ultimately, it comes down to people making decisions for the best part of the city, but we haven't heard that side of it. And I guess the only way we'll hear that is when it comes to a public hearing with the project going in that location.
Right, with a bona fide proposal that
Yep.
you could consider.
And I guess the more due diligence, the more you can frost the cake, the better it's going to be received. So, sounds like we're all in favor of some additional dialogue with the council, with the CLYDE company.
Yeah, one thing I would like to get a couple of questions maybe from the city. One, what's the city's real opinion or thoughts on, is that the best location? And two, if they were to move there, how would that affect other possible future development in that area, if at all? The transfer station we know is already going to be there, so maybe moving this there isn't really a factor at all because the transfer station already,
Maybe it is the best
you
place.
know, already
Right.
does that. So those two things for me is it the best location according to the city? Is that really how they feel? And how would it affect possible future development?
Okay. I do feel the presentation tonight was much better, much more informative to me and helped put me more at ease than previous that I've heard. So I appreciate your guys' time and the way you presented the information. That was good.
That comparison to the dust created on dirt versus asphalt was a huge difference.
How many acres are at your Payson site?
At our Mason site?
Payson.
Oh, Payson
Is
site.
it about half of what this is going to be?
Payson site.
I don't have my laptop with me, but normally
It doesn't seem like it's 40 acres to me.
No. No, I think it's 15 is what the Payson site is.
I travel that road frequently and I haven't really noticed much dust there, but it would only be when you're crushing anyway. Because most of that is either washed gravel or sand, isn't it? For the batch plant.
Correct. On the north end, you do see a storage pile of material. That material's either been crushed out or processed, or it's just hauled back, and we're going to bring in a crusher to process it. And the great thing, I guess, in most cases, before that material is actually crushed, it's actually sold because customers really like the material. It's a lot more affordable than the typical road base itself, so it doesn't stay around as long. So that storage pile in most cases is gone fairly quick.
It is good stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Commissioners, want a quick break? Or move on?
How long is this one going to be? Shouldn't be long.
Want a break? Good. Let's go ahead and move on to the last subject then.
You guys deserve a drink.
Now, you notice how I said last, that means there's no extracurricular after?
Never.
This is the last topic?
Nothing more than this. This is it.
Said with a smile.
Always.
So going back a few years, if you could maybe get us to the property that we're talking about. And it took me forever to find my file on this when we met before, when the zoning was changed. I couldn't believe it was 2018. I was in 2018.
Wow, I can't believe that either.
Really? It
No,
just-
I would have
it shocked
said,
me.
2 years.
Yeah, that was that long ago. It seems like it was yesterday. In short, what happened, so right now we're over here in the city office here, it's the library. On this property here, the Ludlows approached us back in 2015 to change the zoning from R16 on this property to residential office. The difference there being the office part, so that this property could be used for some type of non-residential use. And we talked about a handful of different things. If I remember right, a lot of what we discussed conceptually was the idea that it might be a good place for a real estate office or some kind of relatively low impact professional office use, maybe even some really light retail, that type of thing, which is also allowed in the residential office zone. And as you can see from this map here, back the last meeting of the year in 2015, the zoning was changed from R16 to residential office. Now, as we went through the public hearing process on that zoning, we received quite a bit of comment. And there were concerns that were expressed by area residents, I would just say, about what becomes of this property with that zone change. And, you know, maybe like we saw in recent months on the zone change out along US Highway 6, I think there's a tendency for people to be a little bit hypersensitive to something that's, or about something that's maybe different in their neighborhood. Anytime you use the word commercial, it seems to add to that sensitivity. And we certainly worked through some issues relative to that to provide some assurance to the neighborhood that if the use was converted from a residential use to an office use, things would be done to make sure that the impact was as minimal as possible on the neighborhood. To that end, Mike, if you can go down to, it's page, well, just the second exhibit, exhibit 2 for me. That one right there. And the line work on this is fairly faint, but this is a conceptual site plan that applicants provided back in 2015 that showed how the property could be improved. And it's not unique that people in the older part of the community want to convert a building to that is from a residential use to some office use, typically is what we end up working on. And generally speaking, the issue is parking. Sometimes the building's on the property in such a place that there's enough room someplace else for off-street parking. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes the building needs to be modified. We've seen that a couple of times to make way for a driveway or something like that, so that you can provide off-street parking. And in this case, the Ludlows were able to prove, I think, very, very clearly that based on the amount of square footage that we have with the building, again, the line work here is pretty faint, but they can construct a driveway over here and build a sufficient number of parking spaces here, utilizing a couple of existing ones here to be able to use the square footage of this structure for a professional office use and meet our standards. Also, you know, we require a masonry wall between residential and non-residential uses, so this plan shows that. In this particular case, there's an existing masonry wall here that's almost high enough to meet the requirement, so that would just need to be extended a little bit, heightened in order to meet that requirement. And with this exhibit in hand to show that they could meet our requirements, staff recommended that the zoning be changed. I think Commission did the same thing. City Council changed the zoning. So we had that conversation, that was 2015, and not much happened. I don't know if it was used as a home for a few years, I would assume that was the case, up until sometime in 2019, when staff via council members, city council members, who had received complaints from residents about improvements not being made to the property, but yet there was a business operating there. So we started working with the applicants back in the spring to try to understand what was happening, and to get on a path that has led us to where we are tonight, and to try to make the story as succinct as I can. We've had conversations with the applicant about following through with what's represented on this image here with the site plan improvements. Having the business that's operating there apply for a business license. Right now we do have an application for a business license from that business. I'll talk more about them in just a second. And we're here really tonight to talk about a proposal that the applicants made to leave the site largely as it is. And that would involve, rather than constructing off-street parking and using this lawn space for a parking lot, instead simply relying on on-street parking in a parallel fashion to provide the parking that's needed for the business. And at least in part because of a desire that's been expressed by it's a new homeowner here now than who resided back in 2015 when the zoning was changed. They've expressed a concern about having a masonry wall along that property line. They'd rather have it left as is. So as we as staff discussed the current situation with the applicants, their desire, and as I've talked with this homeowner and understand their desire to not have the wall constructed, and we teed it up really well with the conversation we had earlier tonight about what options exist to allow ultimately for the city to issue a business license for a site that doesn't meet our standard requirements. And really the only options that we have are to either change the requirements, so somehow to lessen the off-street parking requirement, to change the requirement for the wall, or that type of a thing, or with the change to the development enhancement overlay, adding the residential office under that. You made a recommendation on earlier tonight, potentially employing that as a way to say, okay, we understand that you won't be providing off-street parking, which the code requires. You won't be providing a 6-foot masonry wall along each boundary that abuts the residential use, but for whatever reasons you and ultimately the city council want to articulate, you see the site as being better that way than if those requirements are indeed met. And that's the long and short of the question that's before you tonight. Do you want to make a recommendation that overlay be employed so that we ultimately could issue a business license without having off-street parking on the wall? And just maybe one other quick thought. Incidentally, the business that's there now, it seems to me truly like it's a perfect fit. It's a perfect fit for the property, it's a perfect fit for the neighbor, it's about as incredibly low impact as you possibly could have. You know me well enough, at least for the most part, you know that typically I'm not a fan of lessening requirements, creating requirements, creating special exceptions, and that type of a thing. At least relative to this business operating here now, I could probably be convinced better in this case than others to be comfortable with that. That being said, I guess one of the thoughts that some of us have talked about would be perhaps also to consider a plan B. So if indeed you're ready to recommend that the council grant the approval of the overlay so that the parking in the wall don't have to be built, that we also come up with some mechanism that could be employed potentially to require those improvements in the future if the tenant changes and the impact changes, and based on some type of triggers that we have not yet figured out, but things that could be clearly articulated and understood, those improvements would be required in the future if we somehow deem that to be appropriate. So that's where we're at.
That was my question. If the owner to the north changed and they decided they wanted the wall.
That might be a good one, yeah.
What,
Can you go to that slide, Michael? The proposed.
listen,
Yeah.
so what business is in there now that's asking, or that is applied for a building?
It's a business called the House of Lars built. It's an internet influencing company, so they do kind of arts and craft, and then they take pictures and do some video blogs, and they get paid for that.
So not a lot of people coming and going.
Just the employees, you know. Just the
So
employees.
how many more businesses do you anticipate being in the building?
None.
This is just for that building?
Yes. And we haven't changed the interior at all, so it's got, you know, a full kitchen, 2 full baths and all that, and our intention is never to change that.
I guess, Dave, this is a question for both of you. If this inlay is implemented in this manner, and we say you don't need the parking anymore, does that open the door to, let's just say, a dance studio to come in and ask for the same overlay? If I understand what we decided to recommend to the city council, these are handled separately, and that one decision may not have anything to do with another decision. That's up to the discretion of, is it the city council that's going to make these decisions?
Yeah, again, this is a legislative act, so they're the legislative body to make the decisions. Whether the city council ultimately were to approve this request or not, anybody could apply to have the enhancement overlay approved. If they want to make application, we'd be obligated to consider that. A lot of times it'd be a quick discussion, you know, maybe to recommend it would be denied, but
They would still have to go through these points that have to validate it.
you know, that's
Every applicant.
that's certainly the intent. And when the enhancement overlay was written, there was considerable effort put into trying to, again, much like we talked about earlier tonight, to create opportunities that really were pretty limited. And with the enhancement overlay, to try to clearly define what bar somebody would have to get over in order to qualify for the overlay. And those are things that I think absolutely you would want to consider tonight. Is
So these requests for reduced parking and the wall, if it was approved on this site, I think there's some similar zoning right there next to the drive-in, a block away. Does that mean they could come in because now this same overlay, does that follow that next one and say, we don't need the parking, we don't need the fence? Or is it unique to that next request?
it'd be unique to that.
Unique, okay.
That'd be
This is unique to
looking
this
at
property.
Totally
Okay.
different set of eyes.
Yep,
so to
good.
speak.
Good.
How would we word this in a way where if in the future they needed the wall or they needed, the business changed and they needed additional parking, how would we word that?
Yeah, if you want to share any thoughts, it certainly could be as simple as if a different business applies for a business license there, that could be the trigger. We could take it maybe down a little different path, which would be if a different business that's a different use applies, that could be the trigger. It could be a matter of city staff observing a certain number of business-related vehicles parked on the street, you know, over some period of time. That could be the trigger. It could be a matter simply of a neighbor there may be an instigating discussion about why the standard hasn't been met on a boundary. That could be a trigger. I could throw out other thoughts and ideas.
Seems like parking, based on what they've got going right now, I'm hearing like 4 employees, 5 employees. You got 2 parking spaces, you got plenty of room for the employees parking in the current situation.
How long have they been in business? How long have they been doing this there now?
Since April.
Since April. How has it worked out now? I mean, they're parking on the street now,
Yeah.
right?
It's, when you drive by there now, there's usually 1 to 2 in the driveway, and then 1 to 2 somewhere along the, somewhere on First or First South or First East. It doesn't look any different than it does.
You wouldn't know there's a business in there.
Yeah.
What's that?
You wouldn't know there's a business in there.
Not really, other than they do crafty stuff outside sometimes and take pictures in front of the house.
I wonder,
I guess my concern is that someone complained, right?
No, when we went to get the rezoning, the people to the north of us, they, first of all, everybody had a concern, because if you follow First East down, you go to, not called Johnny's now, but
oh yeah,
Whatever.
I still call it Johnny's.
so everybody there thought, oh my goodness, we're gonna have cars backed around, there's gonna be, that was the concern, right? And it's completely valid. I grew up, right here, and I'm used to living downtown as a kid growing up. And so it was a valid concern, and obviously the zoning does not allow that. And so we did have a number of people come in, and we talked to every single neighbor. The people to the north really did, they wanted to make sure that it was landscaped well and it looked good. They weren't so much concerned about the parking, they just wanted to have it.
Can you step up to the microphone?
Yeah. They really wanted it to not impact and suddenly feel like they were next to a commercial or a retail place. So they were the ones that were most concerned. The first go around when we had the meeting, there were probably 4 or 5 neighbors were here. This time there were none. And we've talked to all the neighbors since then. And again, the people on the north, they did, family moved out, new family moved in. They did put a fence for their backyard that runs, which button do you push?
One of the others might work a little bit better for you.
They put in a fence, I guess it runs, this is a garage. They've got a fence that runs from here to here, it's a vinyl fence. The driveway comes, it's actually on our property just a tiny bit. We just had a new survey done, and so their concern is if they parked a car there, whoever's on the passenger side literally couldn't get out. So they're saying, hey, we just want you to leave it alone.
So no one complained about the business being there now?
No.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
That's how we came to know about it. So maybe they didn't complain to the Ludlows,
Oh,
but we received complaints. This speaks to the low impact nature of the business to some extent. I would guess that there'd be a good chance that we wouldn't know today that they were operating, but for that.
yeah, and they applied for a business. They're a legit business. I mean, there's businesses in town that are doing business that don't have a business license, but they needed to apply for a business license. They do trade shows and things like that. So I know that was also part of it, so that's when we started working on it. But we've talked to the neighbors since. Most people, so we used it just periodically as we were fixing it up. We'd come over and visit with family and friends, and Tracy really spearheaded, did some interior work to fix it up for those 2 years, 3 years, and most of the people we talked to had no idea that, so after people moved, they just didn't know, because it's very low impact.
Well, in general, I'm in favor of changes in neighborhoods if the neighbors are okay with it.
You know, I think that in most cases, that's who you're trying to get along with is the neighbors. And if the neighbors in general are okay with this, it's okay. But you have to also understand that, you know, in another 20 years, most of those neighbors will be other neighbors. And, you know, it's likely that business will be gone and maybe you guys don't own it. So my concern is literally, and that's why I asked the question, about what this does to the rest of the city. I wasn't on this commission at the time, but the big brouhaha that happened with the dance studio, you know, was a huge thing. Again?
On Canyon Road.
Oh yeah, on Canyon Road,
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I don't wanna see that happen again where we have someone that comes in after you guys and says, now I want to open whatever it may be, my business, or make my building available for this business. And, you know, you made the concessions for this one on First South, First East, so you've got to make that same condition to me. Because there was a lot of discussion about those businesses in town at that time.
It's true.
I think if we can come up with some easy, simple rules for it, you know, again, where they're at with the head count now, 4 or 5 people, maybe that's the trigger. As long as there's less than 5 employees, they're not gonna have enough impact to cause a problem. But if your next renter was a real estate agent or insurance company that could have, you know, a dozen agents in there, then we could have a problem.
Yeah, and realistically, the way it's set up, it's a 4 bedrooms upstairs? 4 bedrooms and then it's really set up, you could have maybe 6, 7 employees. I mean, that would be really full. That'd be really full.
Yeah.
But you could, but,
How do you guys feel about something like that? Some kind of a
I like that idea.
measuring?
You can set some triggers, some parameters that will,
I mean, Tracy and I were talking, you know, like, this business, they plan on being there about 3 years. They're looking to buy something.
Mhm.
So it couldn't go longer than that, but when they leased it, we did a 3-year lease because they ultimately would like to buy a piece of property and have their own custom-built place. So if it was, when a new tenant moves in and they put in a business license request, that seems very reasonable to us as well.
Do you guys,
If it's a
do you
similar-
guys feel like that would be something you could, that would allow you to at least get this going and have some limitations, knowing that when you rent to future people, that if there was a trigger on employees, then you'd either have to come back and visit the planning commission, or you'd have to, you know, not rent to that person and try to find somebody that had less than 6 employees, if that's the number.
This is really the people that we got in there is exactly the tenant that we envisioned getting.
Yeah, and there's probably,
The road impact and the fact that they don't have people coming and going, you know, to create that additional traffic in the neighborhood by the park. This
Yeah.
is exactly what we talked about, and
it's perfect.
very lucky that we were able to get.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely open to that, and our goal is, as long as we own it, is that that's the kind of business. And we do want to keep it as a home. I mean, there's always that thought of, if you take out the full kitchen, you take out the bathrooms, you know, just have a small bathroom, it's not have full. You could create more office space, but that is not our intention.
Yeah.
We're going to keep it as a single-family home.
Yeah.
But just the ability to have an office space there. So
I think
we're
there's-
very open to that. We feel like
Right.
that's extremely fair.
What do you think about that, Dave?
Just kind of the mechanics of how we get there. I think it probably would be good for the city attorney and I to get together to kind of chat through exactly what that language would look like. You're gonna wanna see that, so that give the Ludlows a chance to review it. I don't wanna push you guys necessarily in any direction, but if you're comfortable with that in concept, we could develop that and bring that back to you if you want to continue this, to act on it in February, or if you wanted to review that just simply informally before we present it to the city council, we could approach it that way. Or you could just leave it up to staff to work out before we present it to the city council. I'm comfortable with anything. I haven't gotten the impression that you're feeling a lot of pressure to move really quickly. So if we took maybe a couple more weeks with that. So if they're comfortable with it, I probably would prefer to bring that back to you. Their next meeting's the 5th of February. That'd give us a chance to review things and give the Ludlows a week or so to instantly, they don't reside here in town, they're out of state, so
You live in Colorado, so.
I would think that we probably get to the point before your meeting where you would necessarily need to be here. I hate for you to make that trip.
We just want there to be an inversion when we come.
But isn't it a beautiful drive?
Oh, it's beautiful. We were just, actually today, we live in Denver. Denver's a beautiful spot, but we were just driving down I-15. It's so much closer to the mountains.
Yeah, yeah.
Lots of different approaches
So
we can take.
here's a thought, I mean, this is a public hearing.
Yes.
What if could we do this? If we felt comfortable with staff understanding our concerns and we approve this, have the public hearing part of it over with, and we give the direction to staff to come up with a solution. Would that end us, if we felt comfortable, would that end us needing to see it again and go into public hearing again?
Once you hold the public hearing and close it, you're unobligated to take any additional public comment. And if I understood you right, if you wanted to have the public hearing tonight and then make a recommendation with maybe direction to staff, it certainly would not need to come back to you.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, and it,
Yeah, for this, I'm not worried.
and the proposed changes, I think I recall that it said that the city council would be charged with making any restrictions or other things to these kinds of changes, you know, on a case-by-case basis. Is that right? It's the city council will. So in other words, if this comes up again,
Yes.
it'll be the same process as what we have tonight,
Exactly.
and that the city council in each case will say, you know, this is okay with these requirements or these exceptions or with these, whatever it might be. Is that?
And as long as they had the same type of a tenant like you're looking for, you'd never have to come back.
That's kind of what I have in mind in terms of
Yeah.
how we craft
Yeah.
regulations,
Okay.
rather than stipulations. I need to mention one other thing. I don't think this is relevant, but I was wrong. I appreciate Mr. Snyder pointing out that back in 2015, the Planning Commission 3-2 vote recommended that the proposal of changes zoning be denied. It was approved by the city council. So
Oh, that's interesting.
I remember there was quite a bit of discussion.
There was,
Yeah.
there was, huh? Well, let's go into public hearing. We are going now into public hearing. And we're going back out of public hearing. I would just suggest that whoever makes a motion to give the staff some direction on either some parking concerns or fence concerns and let them do their work.
Do we want to get specific on that, or do we just want to leave it that we're fine with the findings and conditions now, but as the business use changes, that it needs to be reevaluated? We want to leave it general like that, right?
Yeah, but I think they want to come up with we want to ask staff to come up with some triggers.
To do what Commissioner
Right.
Mitchell just said.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
that's my understanding.
okay. Do you want to go ahead?
That would be a great
I'll
thing
take
for
a
you to
stab at it.
propose.
I'd like to make a proposal that we're recommending this to the council based on the findings and conditions outlined here. The following addition, that as business uses change, that the applicant renews or readdresses,
That would be required. Potentially to make additional improvements to the site.
to make additional changes to the site as per the zoning requirements. Right? Does that work?
I think we understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to see how it got written down.
As the business uses change, as the business use changes, the applicant be required to make additional improvements to the site per the zoning requirements. That-
Potentially.
But I thought the desire is, as the tenant changes, that we basically come forward and say, here's a new tenant, it's gonna have 6 or 3, 4, 5, 6 employees, whatever it is, some number, we come to the council and say, this is the people that are moving, these people are moving out, this company's moving in, and at that point, it gets reevaluated. If we're coming.
May trigger park.
Yeah, if we're coming
It could
forward
be
saying
off-
it's gonna be a daycare, and there's gonna, or it's gonna be a dance hall, or whatever it is, and say, hey, time out, that's suddenly gonna have 50 customers in and out every day, that's not what that's how I understood that.
Yeah, so as the business changes, the city reevaluates the use.
As the business use changes, the applicant may potentially be required to make additional improvements to the site per the zoning requirements.
Based on what city staff decides, not us, right?
Right.
You know, actually,
To be determined by the city council.
geez, going too in the weeds right now.
If you want to
I
bring,
think we
Might be
probably
here.
would want to articulate things now to where it's really cut and dry. This particular tenant is really unique, I think, in fact. They're among a really, really small number of tenants that can operate without bothering anybody, without having the off-street parking that we require. If this were an attorney's office, a title company, a insurance agency, an accounting office, a dentist office, which are the most recent homes that have been converted, you know, in Spanish Fork. In each of those cases, they've needed every bit of parking that we've required. So I think it's probably more a matter of.
So instead of business use, it's tenant.
Unless it's identical to this, and we can find very early on that the impact is identical, the improvements are required.
Okay.
It's probably gonna be
So
more-
instead of business uses, we change that to as this tenant changes.
Yes, and we would probably look at tenant and business as synonymous
Mhm.
in that respect.
and so would staff make that call?
I
As-
think it will be made with the approval of this overlay. So that will be articulated somehow,
Okay.
and maybe there's some way to write some additional latitude in there, but I think that would probably be pretty narrow.
But you're not wanting us to come up with that verbiage now?
Yeah, I'm certainly not ready to help
Yeah.
with that.
How about
If
the
you have strong feelings, we'd love to hear
No,
those.
no, I don't.
No, I think we've got the idea. I think that we maybe should add some verbiage to be finalized by staff. You know, to get the verbiage and to put it in this proposal
Prior to the city council meeting.
prior to the city council.
Yeah.
You guys are much better.
Well, we
That
have
would
an
be-
attorney that will definitely
Yeah.
have his fingerprints on it, so it's
Yeah.
what it is.
I think you said it perfectly. I mean, what's in there right now is great. Everybody's okay with it. But some of the businesses that you just mentioned, we could have some problems, so.
We don't have much experience with businesses with this kind of footprint that don't need parking, you know, that's.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. You got Carrie's Floral Shop, walk
Yeah,
away,
something like that. That's a
and,
good point.
and even though they're retail business, people coming and going, they park in front, they pick up their flowers, they leave.
She never has more than one.
She's got
employee.
one or two employees, so there's another business that could be a floral shop, potentially.
There are things like.
So, okay. So,
So what did you change that
Yep.
language or? Can we second his reads it back to us?
The language be crafted by staff, creating triggers for required improvements prior to city council.
that's solid.
That's good.
Second.
I second.
Like I said.
Okay, we got a
You got a
motion
second,
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. You bet.
Yeah, thanks, you guys.
Hey, have a safe trip back to Colorado.
So we adjourned?
Way past 7:02.
There's three. So it's
We adjourned?
Are we adjourned?
I don't know, are we?
Yes.
Can we adjourn?
You tell us. We're done.
You got that.
Okay.
You got that.
Unless you want to.
Make a motion with adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Dave, where do we sit with, I mean, we had tabled the river bottoms till February.